These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of shopping for insurance. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Help. More info at teethhealth.com, code TOM. HelloFresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Tom. And CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Meat Racket, The Secret Takeover of America's Food Business by Christopher Leonard. This is from the prologue. It's titled The Hidden King. Nobody ever visits the stranded little community of Waldron, Arkansas. But even if they did, a tourist would never see the place for what it really is. Most outsiders would be fooled into thinking it was an actual small town. On any given morning, the residents awaken and begin their routine along Main Street. Old men park their pickup trucks by the curb in front of the Rock Cafe, which opens early for breakfast. As the cafe's booths and tables fill up, a congregation of old-timers in cowboy hats gathers in a loose ring of aluminum chairs out front, smoking and talking and stubbing out their cigarette butts in a bucket full of sand. Later in the morning, Chambers Bank in the south end of town opens up, and the tellers cheerfully greet customers by name. On Thursday at noon, the livestock auction opens in a cavernous barn on the north side of town, drawing crowds of ranchers who haul steel trailers behind their trucks, with cows staring out between the horizontal slats. In the late afternoon, teenagers park their cars by the gazebo south of the auction barn, proudly displaying their Mustangs and Broncos like big game trophies. These events have a rhythm of their own, the clockwork functioning of a small town economy. But it's all just window dressing. All of it would cease to exist in a moment and have no impact whatsoever on the true Waldron or its true economic reason for being. The real tempo of the town's economic pulse is measured by the coming and going of semi-trucks that roll down Main Street at periodic intervals, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In the middle of the night, tanker trucks full of animal feed rumble past the empty stores and out onto country roads that lead into the hilly terrain that surrounds town. At dawn, other trucks trundle in from the hills, heaped high with battered metal crates full of chickens that exude clouds of white feathers along the highway. The tempo can be measured in the regular arrival of train cars full of grain and oil seeds that dump their loads at a feed mill that clanks and hums and churns all night. And in the parade of refrigerated trucks that pull up to a slaughterhouse near the feed mill and get loaded with pallets of frozen meat. This is the real functioning of Waldron, Arkansas, and its true reason for being. This is the heartbeat of Tyson Foods, the nation's biggest meat company. The Tyson plant on the north end of Waldron is the only thing that keeps the town on the map. Appropriately, many residents simply refer to it as the complex. That's because the Tyson plant isn't just a factory, it's more like an entire small town economy consolidated into one property. The complex contains its own feed mill and hatchery, its own trucking line and slaughterhouse that covers several acres of land and processes about 1 million dead chickens a week. The complex is like an economic dark star that has drawn into itself all the independent businesses an economic dark star that has drawn into itself all the independent businesses that used to define a small town like Waldron, the kinds of businesses that were once the economic pillars of rural America. Of course, tourists to Waldron would never see the Tyson plant, and not just because it sits on the north fringe of town away from Main Street. Visitors are stopped at its front gate and forbidden from exploring its grounds. So a tourist would have to be content to stroll along the sidewalks downtown, observing the fake Main Street, the deceptive array of little businesses that make it seem like a community. This illusory appearance cloaks Tyson's existence all the way from its roots in rural America to the grocery store shelves and restaurant menus where its products finally reach American consumers. The average shopper is usually fooled when he or she peruses the meat aisle, seeing what appears to be an abundance of choices and products. Tyson brand name wouldn't necessarily stand out with its logo gracing just a handful of products. But the rotisserie chicken slowly turning in its oven, the Bonisi brand pepperoni, the Lady Astor brand chicken cordon bleu, the frozen chicken pot pie, and the Wright brand bacon all come from the same company, Tyson. And then there is all the unlabeled meat that Tyson floods into the U.S. food system every day. The meat served in cafeterias, nursing homes, fast food restaurants, and suburban eateries where more and more Americans eat their meals. There's a very good chance any of the meat purchased in these places was made by Tyson. Even if Tyson did not produce a given piece of meat, the consumer is really only picking between different versions of the same commodified beef, chicken, and pork that is produced throughout a system that Tyson pioneered. Tyson's few competitors have resorted to imitating the company's business model just to survive. This book aims to explore the vast hidden territory between the remote farms and towns like Waldron, where Tyson raises millions of animals, and the final point of contact where consumers buy the company's meat. Unseen between these two poles is a hidden power structure that has quietly reshaped U.S. rural economies while gaining unprecedented control over the nation's meat supply. Just a handful of companies produce nearly all the meat consumed in the United States, and Tyson is the king among them. The company sits atop a powerful oligarchy of corporations that determines how animals are raised, how much farmers get paid, and how meat is processed, all while reaping massive profits and remaining almost entirely opaque to the consumer. Because Tyson and its imitators are based in the geographic and economic fringes of America in forgotten places like Waldron, the company has managed to escape the scrutiny it deserves. While Tyson's operations are remote, the company's business practices affect virtually everyone. About 95% of Americans eat chicken, which means they almost certainly eat chicken produced by Tyson.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
8 days to go. Wow, time is flying. You know, it seems like when you're basically hunkering down, waiting for this virus to for us to come up with vaccines or whatever. Time just seems to fly. It's amazing. So the election is a week from tomorrow, officially. It'll probably take us a few days to count all the votes, but it's possible there will be such overwhelming in-person turnout. It's starting to look that way in a lot of parts of the country, that it won't even be in doubt, that they won't have to wait for all the mail-in ballots to be counted. We'll see. Obviously, if Trump is ahead on election night, regardless of the vote, they're going to try and do the same thing they did in Florida in 2000, in the year 2000. I was talking to Greg Palast on the phone yesterday, and he pointed out to me something that I didn't know. He said that when the Supreme Court stopped the statewide recount in Florida, there were still over 100,000 ballots that hadn't been counted at all. And the thing that I learned from watching 537, this documentary on, I believe it's Amazon Prime, I could be wrong, but it's one of those services, was that there were over 10,000 votes in Miami-Dade County, which is predominantly Democratic, where the people had tried to push the little pin through the ballot, and the Chad didn't disconnect because the little slot behind it that the Chads would fall into was filled up with Chads. So it just dimpled the ballot, but it was clear that that was what they were poking at, and those 10,000 ballots never got counted. The counting of those ballots was stopped by the U.S. Supreme Court as well. So, that's where we're at. We don't have an absolute right to vote in the United States. And because we don't have a right to vote, red state governors can radically cut back on the number of polling places or the number of voting machines so that working class people are forced to stand in line for 2, 3, 5, 6, 10 hours. We had people standing in line this last week. 10 hours. Because we don't have a right to vote, about 30 million registered voters have been removed from the voting rolls since 2014. So when they show up to vote, they're given provisional ballots that in the red states are almost never counted unless there's a lawsuit. Because we don't have a right to vote, back in the 1960s, William Rehnquist organized this thing called Operation Eagle Eye in Arizona, where he would go out to Hispanic communities and Native American communities. And, he himself was a lawyer, so he'd go out dressed in a suit, a big, tall, 6-foot-plus guy, big guy. But in many cases, it was, local guys carrying weapons, even local police officers in uniform, challenging the right of Black, Hispanic, and Native Americans to vote. It was so successful that took him all the way to become Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. The Republicans loved him for this. Because we don't have a right to vote, Republican Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida has been able to prevent almost 1 million Florida citizens from voting because they owe fines or fees to the government. Because we don't have a right to vote, Louis DeJoy has been able to kneecap the post office, slowing down the mail just in time for the election, and he won't face any legal consequences. Because we don't have a right to vote, back in 2000, the election I was mentioning just a minute ago, Jeb Bush organized a program where he took a felon list from his brother. Jeb was the governor of Florida, George was the governor of Texas. George provided Jeb with a list of all the felons in Texas. Jeb with Katherine Harris, compared that list to the Florida voter list and discovered, oh my God, 90,000 people with names similar. Now, the middle names didn't match in most cases. They were different birthdays. All kinds of things were different. That didn't matter. First and last name is all they were looking at. And even then, if it was James Johnson versus Jimmy Johnson, hey, it's the same person. And they threw 90,000 African Americans off the voting rolls in the weeks before the election, so that they were turned away from the polls. 90,000 African Americans, and thus George W. Bush, so-called, won that election by 537 votes. Because we don't have a right to vote, we have seen open voter intimidation just in the last 4 days in Nevada City, California, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in Miami, in Fort Morgan, Colorado, in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in Los Angeles. And it's a virtual certainty nobody's going to go to jail for any of those things, although there's a black woman in Texas serving 5 years in prison for having voted while being a felon. Honest to God. And she's not alone. But hey, if you're a white person and you show up with your guns at the ballot place to intimidate voters, or your trucks honking and all, no problem. Because we don't have an absolute right to vote, the Supreme Court told the Republican governor of Ohio specifically, and now all governors, because it's a Supreme Court decision, that he could remove millions of Ohio voters from the rolls because they hadn't voted in the previous election and didn't mail back a postcard. Because we don't have a right to vote, red state legislators have been able to force through laws requiring citizens to jump through extraordinary hoops, like getting IDs they normally wouldn't need to use just to vote. Because we don't have a right to vote, Republicans in multiple states have used the courts to make it very, very difficult to drop off your ballot at a convenient drop box, or even to vote by mail. Because we don't have a right to vote, Republicans are rushing through Amy Coney Barrett's appointment to the Supreme Court so that she can pull off a repeat of the 2000 Supreme Court lawsuit, which she, John Roberts, and Brett Kavanaugh all helped write, that stopped the vote count and handed the presidency to George W. Bush. Here's what's going on. And frankly, I think we saw a piece of this. I saw a piece of this last night on 60 Minutes with Norah O'Donnell's interview of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, where every question she asked was a Fox News or Republican frame. She did not ask any questions in a Democratic frame or even a neutral frame. It was like, how are you going to pay for that? And how, you know, I mean, I was just horrified. And she kept asking Kamala Harris, well, you're the most liberal senator. I'm sorry, you ever heard of Bernie Sanders? And then she was like, how do we know you're not a socialist? They're calling you a socialist. Did anybody ask Donald Trump if he's a fascist? Did I miss something? But in any case, the Republicans can't win based on their so-called ideas, things like cutting taxes for billionaires or eliminating protective regulations on polluting corporations. The majority of Americans don't want Medicare privatized. The majority of Americans don't want Social Security shut down or handed over to the big New York banks. The majority of Republicans don't want Obamacare destroyed. A clear majority of Americans, including a clear majority of Catholics and Republicans, don't think police and politicians should insert themselves between a woman and her doctor when it comes to choosing whether or not to have an abortion. The vast majority of Americans think weapons of war should not be carried on American streets. And because the vast majority of Americans disagree with all of these Republican policies, the GOP has had to resort to voter suppression and voter intimidation as their principal strategy over the last 40 years. You know, the first piece of legislation that Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats passed out of the House of Representatives at the beginning of this congressional session almost 2 years ago, the first piece of legislation, H.R. 1, House Resolution number 1, helped establish an absolute right to vote, and Mitch McConnell and the Republicans in the Senate will not even hold a hearing on it. If you care about the survival of democracy in the United States, and frankly, you know, also around the world, as the world looks at us, not so much the last 4 years, but they do. This may be your last chance to get out there and vote. So go to iwillvote.com and double check your voter registration and make sure that you have a plan to vote. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
In our second hour, I want to get into the Trump Civil War. I think it has begun. I'll tell you about that in our second hour. In our third hour, Brian Baird is going to be with us about the vote. And welcome back. 15 minutes past the hour. So did you see the 60 Minutes thing? I mean, I was watching this with my jaw. You know, it's like, well, yeah. I mean, Leslie Stahl did a I think a reasonably good job of asking Donald Trump the questions that need to be asked. And she wasn't using, you know, inflammatory terms like socialist. I mean, she could have. She could have said, you know, there are people who are calling you a fascist. Are you supporting fascism? There are people who call you a racist. Are you supporting racism? Well, I guess she got close to that. So, the Stahl interview I thought was good, but the Norah O'Donnell, who has always, favored Republicans in her coverage over the years, and I think might be married to a Republican operative. I'm not real sure, but it really doesn't matter who she's married to. She's a person and a reporter in her own right. But I was just shocked by that. So, what are your thoughts on how this election is playing out? Who do you think is going to win? How do you think it's going to play out, after the election? And what can we do about that? How do we get an absolute right to vote into law? Are you experiencing voter suppression? Have you experienced voter intimidation? Do you find just the news to be intimidating? I'm hearing from people who are, basically just flipped out. I think the whole country is on edge in ways that, frankly, we haven't seen in a long, long time. I mean, Jared Kushner went on Fox News this morning. Jared Kushner on Fox News. And says, He's talking about black people. He says, Donald Trump can't help them be more successful than they want to be successful. This is a guy whose grifter dad and father-in-law gave him everything he has never worked for anything in his life. And he says, he's talking about the protests after George Floyd's assassination by the police. He says, you saw a lot of people that were just virtue signaling. They would go on Instagram and cry or put a slogan on their jersey or write something on a basketball court. And frankly, that was doing more to polarize the country than it was to bring people forward. Right, virtue signaling. That's what those protests were about. People wanting to go out and say, I'm virtuous. You're not. You over there, you Republicans. I mean, essentially, that's Jared Kushner, honest to God, this morning said that people protesting George Floyd's murder were virtue signaling. It's just incredible. And then this Republican framing. I mean, it's just breathtaking. Norah O'Donnell says, you're very different in the policies you've supported in the past. You're considered the most liberal United States senator. Really? Considered by whom? Kamala Harris isn't the most liberal United States senator. Where'd that BS come from? Oh, that's right, Norah O'Donnell and CBS. You think CBS wants a real liberal in the White House? No big corporation does. We'll be right back. The Hidden History of Monopoly tells how Robert Bork, yeah, that guy from the Reagan era, transformed corporate America and destroyed the American dream. So we have a new video over at ThomHartmann.com for people who are supporters of our program. And it gets into the 2016 election and what lessons we can draw from that for the 2020 election. For example, in 2016, according to the exit polls, and all we have to look at right now are pre-polls, but the exit polls, these are the actual voters who are being asked. In 2016, in Florida, Hillary Clinton, according to the exit polls, beat Donald Trump 47.7 to 46.4. According to the exit polls in 2016 in North Carolina, Hillary Clinton beat Trump 48.6 to 46.5%. In Pennsylvania, according to the exit polls, Hillary Clinton beat Trump 50.5% to Trump's 46.1%. And in Wisconsin, she beat Trump 48.2% to 44.3%. And yet all four of those states gave their electoral votes, the official win, to Donald Trump. Why is that? I lay it all out. You can check it out over at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So people, my sense of things is that people are more on edge now at this particular moment in time than pretty much any other time in my life. And I've lived a long time. I think people are more on edge than they were in the late 1960s and early 1970s when we were in the streets protesting the Vietnam War and the draft. And, the Weather Underground was blowing things up. I think, people are more on edge now. I mean, I'm seeing it all over the place. Yesterday, Louise and I went for a drive. It was just like, hey, let's get out of the house. And, since I got this car, this plug-in hybrid Toyota a couple of years ago, it's fun to drive because the first 30 miles is 100% electric, which is like really great pickup. Anybody who's ever driven an electric car will never go back to gasoline cars. I mean, it's just, the things are going that way. But anyhow, driving around, this guy in this giant red pickup truck is like tailgating me and honking at me because I didn't leave, head off the stoplight fast. Well, actually, I stopped for a yellow light, and he got all upset with me. And then as soon as it turned green, he was on his horn. And then as we're merging onto the highway, he's like flipping me the bird and honking at me. And I'm like, where does this come from? Louise and I were out in front of our house a couple of days ago, And there's, on the curb, there's yellow paint along, in spots along the curb that the city put there years ago, on the edges of people's driveways and things. And this woman is parking her car. She's got her little kid. We live near a park. She's going to go to the park. And she parks on one of those yellow things, on one of those little, it's only about 1.5 feet long, but her car's there. And the police ticket people for this. And so Louise is walking by her car and she says, basically, if you move forward 6 inches, you'll be safer. And this woman just goes nuts. She gets out of her car. She starts screaming and chasing us down the street, yelling, you don't know what it's like to have kids. I've got a kid in this car. He's, I don't think she heard what Louise was saying. And I think she thought Louise was saying something else. It's the only thing I can. And then, we went for this walk. And as we were coming back, she was driving away and she's, giving us the finger again. It's like people are on edge. And I think there's a good reason for that. I mean, look at what's going on. Donald Trump, I don't know if it was yesterday afternoon or this morning, but in the last 24 hours, Donald Trump has tweeted that all this coronavirus news is election interference that should be illegal. He wants to make it illegal for the media to report on the coronavirus. Why would that be? Well, it might be news like this. In Utah, they are preparing to ration care, however you pronounce that, ration care in their hospitals within the next week. They're looking at the numbers of people who are getting diagnosed, and they know that, a few weeks later, a certain percentage of those people are going to end up in the ICU. And they are saying, and this is from Greg Bell, the president of the Utah Hospital Association. They presented this to Governor Gary Herbert on Thursday. The criteria that they're going to use, the doctors are going to use. Patients who are getting worse despite receiving intensive care will be sent home to die. Young people will get priority over old people when it comes to any kind of care. El Paso County Judge Ricardo Samaniego on Sunday issued a curfew from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. because the El Paso hospitals have filled to capacity. We're at a crisis stage, said the judge. In fewer than 3 weeks, we've spiked a 300% increase in people in the hospital. And meanwhile, Donald Trump says the fake news refuses to talk about the China virus. No. He says we've made tremendous progress with the China virus, but the fake news refuses to talk about it. COVID is being used by them in total coordination. This is a tweet. In order to change our great early election numbers, should be an election law violation. Meanwhile, looking at this, the New York Times published an editorial this weekend that says the Republican Party can't win using ordinary methods. They can only win by inflating the white vote via gerrymandering, cracked and packed districts, and ruthless black voter suppression. They can only win with heavy dollops of strident and outright bigotry against Mexicans, Muslims, blacks, Hispanics, Chinese, and anyone else who comes along. Even Canadians will do in a pinch. Today, the Republican Party exists for one and only one purpose: to pass tax cuts for the rich and regulatory rollbacks for corporations. They accomplish this using one and only one method: unapologetically racist and bigoted appeals to win the votes of the heartland riffraff they otherwise treat as mere money machines for their endless mail-order cons. Like it or not, this is the modern Republican Party. It no longer serves any legitimate purpose. It needs to be crushed and the earth salted behind it. So how do you think this is all going to play out? Are you seeing evidence of voter suppression? Are you finding, is my experience of pretty much everybody I come into contact with being freaked and on edge consistent with yours? What do we do about this?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Actually, consider that a rhetorical question. The answer is obvious. We vote the bums out and don't let them back in. We'll be back with your calls after this.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur. This is a book that was written back in the late 90s, but it's still very, very timely. This is from the second chapter titled Class Antagonisms Inside the Fundamental Contradiction of National Oppression. Having just passed the 19th and quickly approaching the 20th anniversary of the LA Rebellion, we should be reminded here of what Rodney King whimpered as he stood in front of a bank of microphones surrounded by class enemies and neo-colonial politicians. We should remember how he'd been dressed in that non-threatening cardigan sweater, white shirt, and black tie, how his hair had been tortured into submission by a jerry curl. We should reflect as well upon how timid and spooked he looked, and on how concerned and stern those who flanked him were as well. That was a Kodak moment. It was staged to foster an image of contrition and resignation, submission, a victim. Rodney King had been led to believe, through a bourgeois sense of reasoning, that the rebellion was really about him, that the reason new Africans and Mexicanos took to the streets of South Central was the result of his filmed beating. That, of course, is typical of mechanical bourgeois thinking. What it's not typical of, however, is someone from the hood. And this cuts both ways. No one in the hoods and barrios ever thought it was about Rodney King. We'd all seen the film over and over like everyone else, but that was par for the course. We'd always seen that, long before anybody caught it on tape. Actually, we'd experienced much more than that. Why, it's safe to say that the hoods had gone to war with each other in vicious waves of internal, intra-class combat for much less than that. Though, because of a general colonial mentality which prevents the challenging of bottom-up oppression, the same hood forces will not, in any systemic way, wage war on the pigs, or for freedom, land, and socialism. Rodney King alone, and of his own accord, would not have thought to hold a press conference to ask the asinine question, in the form of a whimpering request, can't we just all get along? The fact of the matter is, we are getting along. New Africans and Mexicanos are getting along just fine. What we couldn't understand was why he was admonishing us for getting at the exploiters of our communities. The impression he gave, with his handler's hands up his back like a ventriloquist troll, was that a race riot was going on, as if we had all begun to kill each other or burn and rob each other's homes. His handlers compelled him to send up a false flag, a diversion. But you see, this was the very thing that exposed the class interests and reactionary politics of the Uncle Toms that had been designated to handle him, and by extension, us. Let's go back for a minute. Let's talk social development, aka history. There exists a fundamental contradiction in our lives that, like an elephant in the room, no one wants to acknowledge. As a consequence of the war waged upon various African nations by European powers, those of us captured and kidnapped were taken out of our own self-determining social developments and violently forced into Euro-American history. This is not simply a clever play on words. This is a reality. We lost the ability to control our own destiny. Read that again. From that time until now, the fundamental basic contradiction between the U.S. oppressor nation and our own oppressed and colonized nation has been the governing imperialist relationship, which is to say, us not being in control of the qualitative factors that determine our lives as a people, as a nation. Our tradition of struggle against this fundamental contradiction has taken many forms, some hidden or obscured, some open and hostile. But all of these have been open to resolve the fundamental contradiction and to regain our independence. While there have been some bona fide struggles to resolve the contradiction, there have also been reactionary neocolonial struggles waged by internal enemies loyal to the oppressor nation and culture that have tried time and time again to subvert and control our destiny for the benefit of the capitalists. They've come among us, always imposed from above, stirring up emotions and giving lip service to progress, equality, justice, and prosperity. These always within the colonial confines of the oppressor's arrangements, and none collectively ever materialize, because without a resolution of the fundamental contradiction, that is the freeing of our productive forces from U.S. imperialism and the governing of our own affairs, we'll remain a minority within the American system as opposed to a majority in our own, and subjected to the established bourgeois social contract, i.e. colonialism, neo and post. We can parade all through the empire with black congressmen, black mayors, black governors, black police chiefs, black Supreme Court justices, hell, even a black president. And absolutely nothing will alter the genocidal relationship that governs our national oppression here, because the blacks are part of the colonial apparatus. They have made a strategic alliance with the capitalist imperialists
to act as go-betweens in our oppression and exploitation. This is a conscious class stand. The black petty bourgeois is not innocently confused, like, say, Mrs. Jackson across the street is, about our national oppression, about the existence and subjugation of New Africa. They are well-read, have traveled in our experience. They've just chosen sides against us and in favor of our historical enemies. And the sooner we recognize and internalize this, the better off we'll be. Black ain't nothing but a color. As a designation of our national identity, it has played out. It is a superficial understanding at best and a foolish and dangerous analysis at worst. We have no collective control over the qualitative factors which determine our lives. We do not, in other words, control our destiny, not as a people or a state. The book is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur. In the science revolution this week, how does a nation best deal with a leader who intentionally kills its citizens? Also, Kelsey Lamp with Environment America is here reporting on the new American blueprint for our oceans. This could be a sea change. Kevin Camps from Beyond Nuclear drops by on how more Fukushima water is being released into the Pacific Ocean. And in Geeky Science, how a Green New Deal could save hundreds of thousands of lives. Tune into the science revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Not good. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. The election, we are in the dead heat time. You know, it's the last stretch, the last week and a day. It's amazing when you think about it, isn't it? Shelby in Tallahassee, Florida. Hey, Shelby, what's on your mind today?
Oh, so much, Tom. Thank you so very much for the forum that you bring to enlighten us every day. The framework, of course, and the tenets of this, as you were just sharing, the Powell memo, which you've given us the tenets of many times, and I use and have read that, and I actually have a copy of it right here. I also think that the hidden history of the Supreme Court, your book, speaks well to this frameworking, that the interrelated tenets of understanding this so-called meritocracy and cultural complex and deficit hawk context to our budget and this colorblindness, as you were speaking. But I one of the things that I wanted to get into was the Norah O'Donnell. I was so delighted, and it prompted me to call because my husband and many of us over the past hours, we've received, hundreds and even thousands of outreach with regard to how Norah really did frame an attack on our historic candidate for VP. This is a woman of color who is an accomplished woman, and somehow she was projected as a woman who is bringing a different mindset, a different perspective. Well, I'm one of those suburban women, and I live in suburbia with many other women who are multicultural, as her candidate, her co-candidate, Biden stated, President Biden, Vice Biden said, the suburb of the 50s is not of 2020, as you well know, Tom.
Yep.
And so this mindset that there's a horse race that has to be framed for the Democratic candidates, but never framed in the cultural conflicts, as you say, of the neo-Nazi. They literally have arrested people here in the past days. That speaks to this cultural conflict that is never brought forward by the media, but the Democrats have to explain a negative, one that encompasses accomplishment even. And we are very upset with Norah because we had given her a purview, and we're calling for a boycott on that Norah O'Donnell lady because we're calling for that. There's a sister vote. We've got her back group that comprises of very accomplished black women in this country, white women as well, Asian women. I also want to lay down some hope markers because I am a person of faith. And I believe in the measure of Matthew 25, that we are our brothers and sisters' keeper. And we want to also congratulate the naming of Archbishop Gregory to being a cardinal by Pope Francis. We're very delighted with that. I want to lay down some markers of hope where we have a country, and I've been a part of it, getting ready to get on a call. We're running a virtual campaign on the Democratic side, and it has been innovative. It has been creative. It's multi-generational, multicultural. Multi-thought process. We were listening to the millionaires, Tax the Millionaires group last week, who are comprised of, Forbes just was talking about the millionaires group this morning on an article online, where we have conscious thought. The corporate America, if you have seen since the Floyd reckoning, where corporate America put forward commercials that were diverse and contexting of where we know we need to go. That was encouraging. Now, there's still a long way to go here, but I'm encouraged. Like I said, I want to lay some hope markers. We have to carry that there's a framing that the media always have for the Democratic Party, because we represent the coalition of the will, of the goodwill, and this anti-intellectual, culture. They're calling it cancer culture. I think the young people were telling me on the email about
cancel.
This is the thing. Yeah, they're calling it a cancel, that we are trying to cancel the culture. What are we trying to cancel the culture for them with? Oh, they want to carry 1930s to 1950s fascist neo-culture? Is that what they're trying to have?
That's exactly what they're trying to do. Shelby, I have to move along to other callers here, but your points are all so well made. And I thank you for making them. I'm so glad to hear that there are networks. I think we've all heard stories about them, but not at the level of detail that you're talking about, of people who are pulling friends and communities and neighbors and like-minded people together all over the country. And
it's fantastic, Tom. This virtual campaign, I believe, will also help us to push forward the energy we need to lobby for the changes that we are, in fact, putting forward, that the president candidates are carrying, and I am hopeful.
Yeah, me too. And the real work, Shelby, is going to start on January 21st. That's when the real work begins. So, yeah, I'm with you. Shelby, thank you very much. It's great to hear from you. Tom in Waupaca, Wisconsin, if I'm saying that right, Tom. Welcome to the program.
Good morning.
You're on the air.
Good morning, Tom. Thank you for the call. Greetings from Wisconsin, where we've been a minority legislative-driven state since Scott Walker. We're voting in numbers. We're anxious, just like you say. But my real reason for calling is the Supreme Court. I think it's incumbent upon you and the media, all of us, all the legal reporters, White House correspondents, to lay a lot of shade and heat on John Roberts to call publicly for the recusal of 3 justices, including the new one to be anointed today, to recuse themselves from anything and everything Trump that comes their way in the coming weeks, months, and years. And that's what I think, and other than, of course, the election, I think a lot of that should start dropping now on all these legal reporters from Nina Totenberg and the rest who suck at their jobs, frankly, and we need to put this to rest. And we need a lot of heat going on John Roberts, asking him publicly to go public and tell all 3 of them, you got to recuse yourself when all this shit hits the fan. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah. Tom, I'm sorry we can't use language like that on the air. So, Joyce, you got to flag Tom for future reference. CJ in Titusville, Florida. Hey, CJ, what's on your mind?
Yes, Tom, 2 quick things. I think you mentioned before in the Bush-Gore decision, there was a statement made somehow in writing that this is a one-time thing and we'll never do it again, or doesn't set a precedent. The other thing is... and the other thing, and I'm thinking if this case goes to the Supreme Court, which likely is their Does that, do they just blow past that, or does that really apply at all?
No, the Supreme Court has cited that decision I believe three times, maybe four times now since it was made. And in the decision, they say, please don't ever cite this decision. I mean, not literally using those words, but using the legal version of those words. And I'm fully expecting this. Obviously, Donald Trump is fully expecting this. I mean, that's why he wants, Amy Covid Barrett on the Supreme Court so that she can rule, in case John Roberts wimps out. And we're going to have three justices on the court who are, who worked on that 2000 campaign, who helped write the briefs and argue the case before the Supreme Court that 10,000 votes in Miami-Dade County should never be counted, that over 100,000 votes statewide should never be counted, that the election should be handed to George W. Bush and stop the recount, or right now, even though the recount was automatically triggered by Florida state law and then verified, confirmed by the Florida State Supreme Court. And the 10th Amendment says, states have the right states run their own elections. The Supreme Court had literally no legal right to insert itself into this decision. And they did it in 2000. And frankly, I think not only are they fixing to do it again, but, Donald Trump is counting on that. And apparently Mitch McConnell is too. It wouldn't cost Mitch McConnell anything to wait a week to put Amy Coney Barrett on the Supreme Court and to wait until after the election. Probably wouldn't cost him anything, in terms of politics or whatever. But the reason he doesn't want to do that is he wants her on the bench, sworn in, installed before Election Day, so that if they can figure out a way to squeak this thing into the Supreme Court, that she can be part of the vote that hands the election to Donald Trump, the same way that the 5-4 decision in Bush v. Gore, the 5 Republican appointees on the court were able to put George W. Bush on the Supreme Court. And John Roberts helped write that brief, which is why George W. Bush took him from being an obscure lawyer to being Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court overnight, that fast, because he was the guy who put George W. Bush in office. And it's like, wait a minute. CJ, thank you. Spot on. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And then Norah O'Donnell going off on, and everybody else going off on, Joe Biden really screwed it up with fracking, right? Okay. This is a survey done in Pennsylvania. Should Pennsylvania's goal be to generate 100% of its energy from clean wind sources like solar and wind?
Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
66% of all Pennsylvania voters agree with that statement. 100% solar and wind in Pennsylvania. 66%. And welcome back. Dennis in Aptos, California. Hey, Dennis, what's on your mind today?
Well, I've always thought that the mid-'60s to early '70s, the anti-war movement and everything else, that young people were actually more interested in the clothes and the music, the new clothes and the new music, than they actually were in the politics. And my sister, who was 3 years older than me, about a year younger than you, she voted for Reagan in November of 1980, which shocked me.
Yikes.
Because she was such a, left-wing, way more hippie-ish than I ever was. I was the more conservative kid, although I certainly became, I think I've become more liberal as I've gotten older. So I wanted to bring that up because I think we actually might be more on edge now than then. And 1968 was a pretty weird year. I mean, there was a lot of violence going on, but I think now it spans the spectrum. We have people in their 60s and 70s who hate Trump and want to see him out of office, as well as young people. And I think that's why we're going to see a landslide next Tuesday. I really think there's going to be a landslide for Biden. And it's going to be, a lot of people are actually voting against Trump.
I think so too, Dennis, but I'm afraid to say it out loud. It's like, knock wood. I'm sorry, yeah. Dennis, finish your thought.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I really think it's looking more and more like that because Arizona and Georgia and Florida. I mean, we've got states that could go blue that you never would have thought that even a year ago. But now it looks very likely. And really, it's people who are just fed up with Trump. Even if they're Republicans, the old-fashioned Republican, they are fed up with Trump. They want him out because they see that he's a disaster. And he was a disaster last night on 60 Minutes, as well as Norah O'Donnell, who, you know, if she should be fired, and then she could get a job at Fox where she could.
Yeah, I mean,
really
her question to Kamala Harris was basically, "How bad a socialist are you?" It's like, really, you know.
Yeah.
No, I'm not still beating my wife. I mean, that, you know, as Richard Nixon famously said back in 1968. Actually, maybe that was the 72 election. But in any case, yeah, I mean, it's just that 60 Minutes was just shocking to me. I mean, I knew about the Trump stuff, but when they put Norah O'Donnell, you know, down with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and all she did was say, respond to this Fox News point, respond to this Fox News point, respond to this RNC point, please, you know, and I mean, it was like, oh my God. It was, you know, whereas the stuff that Leslie Stahl was asking Donald Trump was pretty straight up stuff, you know. I mean, 200,000 people dead. You know, that's not an allegation that somebody's a socialist. And Leslie Stahl, you know, bless her heart, did not say, you know, there are people in America who say you're a fascist or that you're a Nazi. You know, please, you know, or that you're the most fascist president we've ever had, or that, you know, you are one of the most corrupt businessmen in New York City, in the history of New York City, you know, which is pretty bad. So how do you respond to that? You know, she never said any of those things. Dennis, thank you for the call. It's, you know, spot on. Amazing stuff. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be back. I mentioned, by the way, Brian Baird's going to be with us. He used to be the congressman for the town right north of us, Vancouver, for Southern Washington State. And, well, you'll learn all about it in our third hour. Stick around. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So we've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for the folks who support our program, and it's about exactly why rich people, I'm talking about people who make more than $1 million a year marginally, and over $3 million a year, you know, that group totally. Why this group of people who are multi-millionaires and are making, literally bringing into the house over $1 million a year and over $3 million a year, why would they want to destroy Obamacare? Turns out there's a very simple answer. And a very straightforward answer, and a rather shocking answer, that they would put all this time and effort, years of work, into trying to kill Obamacare and throw 20, 30, 40,000 people, million people, excuse me, off their health care. And you can see it, hear it, read all about it, as it were, over at thomhartmann.com in our new members-only video. Oh, welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's see here, Greg in Maple Valley, Washington. Hey, Greg, what's up?
Yes, hello, Tom. Thanks for your show. Very important footprint you have in the democracy we all are trying to support and be a part of. My concern, especially lately, has been that there's been an increasing use, even in the mainstream media, of the word militia to describe what is simply armed vigilantism. And
or gangs.
Excuse me?
Or gangs. I'm going to get into that in the second hour here. Yeah.
Yeah. And lately it's a slippery slope that we have begun down, and it seems like we're slipping down that slope even more rapidly in the last few weeks, because I've heard the term militia used to describe armed vigilante groups, no other thing to call them.
Yeah, the media is not doing a decent job with this. Yeah, and, it's doing a terrible. And I'll own my piece of it, because this use of the word militia is so ubiquitous. I've used it to describe these guys repeatedly, and I'm having to intentionally catch myself and say, wait a minute, these are not militias. The National Guard is a militia. These are gangs, pure and simple. They're gangs. It's like MS-13, only these are white guy gangs. And I mean, let's just call them what they are. They are proto-fascist domestic terrorists. And it's just that simple, and it really needs to be considered as being that simple. So yeah, spot on. John in Seattle. Hey, John, what's up?
Thanks, Tom. On the democracy issue, I live in King County, and I can track my ballot online, and I know that my ballot has already been counted. I'm an occasional volunteer for Sightline Institute, which among its projects has a democracy project to suggest ways that make it easier for people to vote. And on October 23rd, they posted an article recommending that ballot tracking in Oregon and Washington be statewide. Apparently, it's done in Seattle because Seattle is a richer city, but it's not done across the state. And they talk about 5 other states that do have comprehensive tracking, and suggest that Oregon and Washington should implement that too.
That would be a really good idea, and these are the ways that we expand democracy in the United States, and we need to be looking at these things after the election. Mayor in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Mayor, what's on your mind?
Oh, well, Trump was just here in the Lehigh Valley for a rally, and at one point he said, those are beautiful trucks over there. I'd like to get in one of them and just get the hell out of here. Yeah, get the hell out. Oh, my God, these people don't even know they're being dissed. What dummies.
Oh, this is, he was in Erie, Pennsylvania a couple days ago. John Oliver was making fun of this, and he said, if it wasn't for this virus, I wouldn't be coming here to Erie, Pennsylvania. Who wants to come to Erie, Pennsylvania? Yeah. I wouldn't have been here. It's like, really?
Yeah, well, apparently he must have some allergic reaction to Pennsylvania, because he said that. Now he's saying he just wants to get the hell out of here.
Oh, amazing. Absolutely amazing.
And I concur.
Thank you for that, Mayor. Thanks for sharing that story with us. I appreciate it. I want to get one more caller in here before the end of the hour. Mark in Sauk City, Wisconsin. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I was just thinking that actually, they say we don't have the right to vote. Well, look at Article 9, in the Bill of Rights. The enumeration doesn't disparage certain rights. I mean, that and number 10, maybe those are two that are traditionally used to defend the right to vote, that we think of 15, 19, 24, and 26 amendments to the Constitution. But I mean that
they all reference the right to vote, yes.
Yeah, they all reference right to vote, and while 9 and 10 do not, there's certainly more that directly points to the people's right to vote than there is for the Supreme Court to decide the constitutionality of any law. There's not, as Hamilton pointed out, and I can't remember the number now, there's not a syllable that expressly grants them the right to decide the constitutionality of laws. And certainly there's nothing to say, well, they can decide. 78. Yeah, they certainly shouldn't be overturning elections, and if they do turn this into a banana republic, they should take a lesson from what happens in all these other banana republics to judges that make people unhappy. I mean, they're one of the first to be assassinated, and I don't want to see that happen.
Yeah, look at what's going on in Belarus right now with Lukashenko. I mean, it's like people are in the streets because they know the election was stolen, and they're not going away. I mean, they're coming back over and over. They're having a general strike today. The entire country. We'll be right back. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of shopping for insurance. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. More info at teethhealth.com, code Tom. Hello Fresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code Tom. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Tom. And CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom.
We say fight back!
Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Edward Nell's new book, Progress and Poverty in Economics. The subtitle, Henry George and How Growth in Real Estate Contributes to Inequality and Financial Instability. This is from the introduction, which is subheaded, Reviving the Work of America's Most Original Economist. Andrew Mazzone and I collaborated on a project to review the work of the 19th century American economist Henry George, especially his landmark book, Progress and Poverty, 1879, to see how George's work stood up in the light of modern economics and to determine what could be brought up to date and applied to the contemporary world. We wanted to establish that George's work was relevant and also to criticize American economists for having overlooked or rejected George, both in his own time, when his work was a worldwide sensation, and afterward, even today. Andrew died suddenly in the middle of the project. This book is a tribute to him and completes what we began. George began his career as an author and public personality with Progress and Poverty, arguing that progress brought poverty in its wake and that poverty might even outpace progress, an important original point of view that has not lost any of its relevance since George's time. In fact, in our age of burgeoning inequality, it may be more relevant today than ever before. The grounds for this paradoxical interlinking of progress and poverty lay in the effect of rising rents. For George, rents were payment, not for the use of land in the usual sense, but for pure access to specific places and locations. But why should some people have the right to limit others' access to the use of the earth? Surely it belongs to us all. Worse, the limiting of access by demanding payment would undermine the benefits of innovation and hard work. To prevent this linking of progress and poverty, George said a major policy shift in taxation was required. This is well known among economists as the Georgist single tax on rents, or the Henry George theorem. Since George's time, there has been progress both in the economy itself and in economic analysis. The economy has been growing, and growth models have become highly sophisticated, in many cases focusing on matters that were central to George a century earlier. But that progress has also led to poverty, obvious in the economy itself. Our mainstream economics is also poverty-ridden, stricken. Our analytical models do not explain the persistence of poverty very well, nor do they account for crises and crashes, let alone the recent and stubborn growth of inequality. The mainstream theory of income distribution, marginal productivity, which assumes diminishing returns for all these factors of production and the markets will coordinate their adjustment. Distribution is hopelessly flawed. George rightly rejected an early version of it. And contemporary economic theory has almost completely lost sight of rents and real estate, even though real estate was center stage in the global financial crisis of 2008, a crisis directly resulting from speculation in the housing market. And in 2016, Donald Trump, a real estate developer whose rise to power is intimately linked to rents and real estate speculation, was elected president. With a solid Republican majority in Congress, he began to implement a set of relentlessly regressive trickle-down economic policies that can be expected to lead to more poverty among vast segments of the population. Andrew and I wanted to find insights and tools in George's thought to counter this trend, to support progress and alleviate poverty. Before Andrew died, we had settled on 5 main points in George's writing that we wanted particularly to explore. 1, George emphasized cooperation as well as competition in regard to increasing productivity. He saw that the division of labor and cooperation as settlements developed on new land created value in location and generated increases in output while bringing about innovation. This is what generated the differentials on which rent is based, as we will explain. Number 2, George and his followers claimed that the total value of land in a region would tend to equal the value of the aggregate output of that region. 3, further, they claimed that total rents would tend to equal the costs of government, so that taxing rents would pay for government. And number 4, they contended that unless prevented by an activist government, inequality in wealth and income, roughly between the upper and lower classes, but also between other significant groups, would tend to rise inexorably. And number 5, and finally, George repeatedly attacked land speculation and its tendency to withdraw land from productive use and to promote concentration, a point that seemed to both Andrew and myself to have a direct bearing on today's world. Only today it's not land alone, but finance generally that is subject to speculative excesses. I wrote up notes on theory while Andrew worked on rents, cost of government, land values, and GNP. I eventually put our notes together into 2 more or less finished articles to present at the annual conference of the Eastern Economics Association in New York City. Economists have given George short shrift, which is a shameful oversight. He has much to teach us. He was uniquely American, perhaps our greatest economist, certainly our most original. He is justly famous and heralded in the 19th century, and his book Progress and Poverty, which is the source for much of our analysis on these pages, was the best-selling book on economics of that entire century. The book Progress and Poverty in Economics by Edward Nell.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So, do you remember what caused the National Guard to show up in Minneapolis after George Floyd was murdered by the police there and people started coming out in the streets and protesting? It was during a protest, somebody firing a gun into the police department while there were people inside the police department. That provoked the National Guard. And then what provoked the breaking of windows? That was a guy smashing windows, they called him Umbrella Man, with a crowbar or a baton of some kind at an auto parts store. Well, we learned a few weeks ago, maybe even longer than that, that Umbrella Man, the guy who was smashing the windows, who started the whole looting thing, was a right-wing provocateur. And now we've discovered who the guy is who was shooting into the police station. This by Andy Mannix over at the Star Tribune, the Minneapolis Star Tribune. In the wake of the protests following the May 25th killing of George Floyd, a member of the Boogaloo Boys opened fire on Minneapolis Police 3rd Precinct with an AK-47 style rifle and then screamed, "Justice for Floyd," as he ran away. And keep in mind, this is a white guy who wants to start a race war in America, a racially based civil war. He's 26 years old. He's from Bourne, Texas. He went all the way from Texas to Minneapolis to try to start his war. This was on May 27 and May 28. According to charges, he was wearing a skull mask and tactical gear. He shot 13 rounds at the South Minneapolis Police Headquarters while people were inside. He also looted and helped set the police building on fire, which caused Governor Tim Walz to activate the Minnesota National Guard. And everything kind of went downhill from there, which is exactly why this guy did this. His name is Ivan Harrison Hunter. And 2 hours after the police precinct was set on fire, Hunter texted with another Boogaloo member in California, a man by the name of Stephen Carrillo. Now, I'm giving their names because there's a storyline here that you need to follow. So Hunter sets fire to the police department, fires 13 rounds into it with an AK-47. And then he sends a text message to Stephen Carrillo in California and says, "Go for police buildings." And Carrillo replies saying, "I did better, LOL, laugh out loud." Because 3 hours before Carrillo got this text message from Hunter, Hunter having just fired into the police building in Minneapolis, 3 hours before he got that text message, Carrillo had just shot and killed a federal police officer in Oakland, California, protective services officer. And then 5 days after this, Carrillo shot and killed a sheriff's deputy in Santa Cruz when people were trying to arrest him. And then he stole a car and wrote "Boog" on the hood of it in his own blood. But it gets worse. So Hunter, who's corresponding with this guy Carrillo in California, among others, goes back to Texas after shooting up the police station in Minneapolis. Because, you know, he's a white guy. Nobody's going to suspect him of anything. He can get on a plane. He can drive anywhere he wants. The police don't stop him. He goes down to Texas, and the police pull over his truck because there's 3 guys in it along with him wearing tactical gear and carrying guns. And they thought, maybe we should check these guys out. Hunter was in the front passenger seat. He had 6 loaded banana magazines for an AK-47 in his tactical vest. The officers found an AK-47 style rifle, 2 AR-15 rifles in the rear seat of the vehicle, a pistol next to the driver's seat, and another pistol in the center console. On Facebook, Hunter, the guy who shot into the Minneapolis Police Department and basically started, you know, Trump is running around going, "Oh my God, look at this! They're setting police stations on fire. They're firing at the cops." It was the right-wing domestic terrorists doing this. The white guys on Facebook, which has become a cesspool of right-wing, hate and conspiracy theory. I mean, it was just last week, or maybe the week before, that Zuckerberg finally said, okay, no more Holocaust denying. Really? For years, Facebook has been nurturing these guys. And Hunter on Facebook wrote, "I helped the community burn down that police department, that police station. I didn't protest peacefully, dude. Want something to change? Start risking felonies for what is good." And then he says, "The BLM protesters in Minneapolis loved me." He referred to himself as a terrorist. He is the 3rd member of the Boogaloo Boys to be charged in Minneapolis, just in Minneapolis. Meanwhile, there's a new guy who, Kyle Rittenhouse went up to him from Illinois. His mother drove him up to Wisconsin with his AK-47 or AR-15 or whatever it was, so that he could kill a couple of people, which he did. I shouldn't say so that. I doubt his mother thought that he was going to kill people. What do you think when your kid is going with an assault weapon to a protest? But in any case, there's a new guy who's going to be fundraising and asking for money online among, Trump supporters. And this guy's name is Treisman, Alexander Hillel Treisman. And he was arrested in North Carolina in a van carrying 4 rifles, a handgun, an explosive, and a bomb-making manual. He also had over $500,000 in cash. Huh? $500,000 in cash? And why did they arrest him? Because he had just posted online, "Should I kill Joe Biden?" ? Back in May, Treisman, this guy, was in Joe Biden's neighborhood. He was eating at a Wendy's within 4 miles of Biden's home while conducting a search for Biden's address. This is from Mark Sumner over at the Daily Kos. The title is "Plot That Brought Would-Be Assassins to Biden's Revealed as List of Violent Threats Grows Longer." After he was at Biden's place, he went up to New Hampshire and stopped at a gun store to buy a new AR-15 and inquire about night vision goggles. But even more recently than that, last Wednesday, 41-year-old James Dale Reed was arrested after threatening to kidnap and kill both Biden and Kamala Harris. He was arrested because he had given someone a note who had a Biden sign in their yard. "We are the ones with those scary guns. We are the ones your children have nightmares about." You'll recall just 2 years ago, Cesar Sayoc, another Trump fan. These are all Trump fans, right? Another Trump fan, this guy living in a white van down in Florida, was arrested after sending 16 bombs to people that he thought were critics of Donald Trump, including one to Joe Biden and one to Kamala Harris. He was sentenced the same week that Patrick Crusius drove to the El Paso Walmart and killed 22 Hispanic people. And that same week also, Connor Betts killed 9 people in Dayton, Ohio after leaving a Twitter message that said, quote, "Millennials have a message for the Joe Biden generation, hurry up and die." This is I don't think any of this stuff is getting anywhere near enough attention in the press. Now, I get it that the corporate media, the mainstream media, is the story that they're running off. And, and I remember being in the news back in the late 60s and early 70s when we were asked by the IRS and the local state police not to cover an anti-tax protest. I get it that the media doesn't want to encourage this by talking about it.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
But how can you address it, challenge it, and solve this problem if we don't discuss it? We'll be back. And welcome back. Brian in Anaheim. Hey, Brian, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Voter suppression, honestly. I think the key to getting a national right to vote is going to come down to public outrage. And the Democratic leadership needs to use their bully pulpits to aggressively go after the Republicans' efforts to take away our vote the same way the Republicans go after Democrats for allegedly trying to take away their guns. That's going to be the key. The GOP is great at tapping into public outrage, and I don't know about other Democrats, but now that I'm familiar with Greg Palast's investigative work on the massive nature of voter suppression, I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore. And I think that's a good thing. And I always try to take what you teach us and ask myself, what can I do specifically? And you can't email Nancy Pelosi unless you're one of her constituents, but anyone can email Chuck Schumer. And I'm pretty sure I was just in the process of emailing Kamala Harris because she's my senator. And I believe anybody can email her as well and try to get this message, because you've shared in the past that after the theft of the 2000 election by George W. Bush, you and several others of your constituents went and met with members of Congress about future concerns about fair elections.
Yeah,
and
it was a little
if I
later
remember
than that. It was
correctly,
around
you said
2005, but yes.
Oh, okay, gotcha. But you said after the 2004 thing in Ohio, yeah. So they said, oh, we don't want to worry people, but we do want to worry people. That's the thing. We need to everyone. You know, you're a psychotherapist, and thank you so much for writing How to Living ADHD. By the way, there's some great psychotherapy tools in there that I absolutely loved.
Oh, thanks.
But you're familiar with that. Everything is that motivates people is moving like towards pleasure and away from pain. So I don't know about you, but this idea that people are going to take away my right to vote, that activates me. Like, that's pain. That moves me away from that. So what do you think about this idea of paralleling this issue of the Democrats are trying to take away your guns? I believe has been very effective in motivating Republicans. Do you think paralleling that effort and saying the Republicans are trying to take away your vote, get angry, get scared? Do you think that's a good tactic?
Yeah. Here's how it works, Brian, and I wrote about this in Cracking the Code. Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister, Goebbels said that the key to controlling the populace is basically a simple two-step process. Number one, you pick three ways. You do it in groups of threes. And I don't know if you've noticed, but you'll probably start noticing now when you read newspaper articles and things in nonfiction. Typically, when things are presented, they're presented in groups of threes. We remember in groups of threes. It's the most convenient for us. So you pick three things that are terrible about your opponents, and you pick three things that are wonderful about yourself. That's step one. And then step two is you hammer them over and over and over and over and over. And this is why any Republican can tell you small government, limited regulation, low taxes, right? They've got their three things, and they've been doing this for a decade. And they'll say, Democrats, socialism or high taxes or, whatever. They've got their three things. We need to figure out what our three things are. The three ways that we characterize the Republic, and not that I want to take advice from Goebbels, but he was simply stating what was obvious. We identified the three things that the Republicans, can be essentially condemned for, and the three things that the Democrats
I think taking away our vote has to be number one, or definitely top three. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we saw this in the 2016 election, it was Hillary Clinton's emails in Benghazi, and there was one other thing. I forget what it was now, but that's what they did. Brian, I got to run. Thanks. The Hartmann Report is a free daily podcast 7 days a week, and you can find our entire 3-hour podcast over at thomhartmann.com. Hey, we have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for folks who support our program. It's about a growing movement, oddly enough, on the hard right, on the far fringe extreme right, that says that because Congress, after the Civil War, had not seated senators and members of the House from the former Confederate states and refused to until they changed their state constitutions to eliminate slavery, because they did not have a say in the writing and the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments that ended slavery, gave equal protection under the law to everybody, and guaranteed the right to vote to formerly enslaved people, that because the Confederate states were not represented, these are illegitimate amendments. And oddly, one of the people who's at the forefront of this is Amy Coney Barrett. It's all over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Oh, back to, Nora O'Donnell's going after, again, she was going after Biden. I forget if it was a Biden question or a Harris question, or if she got, zinged him on both of them. But she was like, oh, you guys want to do away with fracking, and you guys want to do away with fossil fuels, and I understand you're walking that back, but here's some actual polling. Right? This is an actual poll in Pennsylvania that was done on October 23rd. The first question: the primary goal of Pennsylvania's energy policy. Now, keep in mind, what we heard on 60 Minutes and what we hear on the news, I've heard it 4 or 5 times now on MSNBC and CNN. is that Joe Biden made a huge mistake by saying that we've got to transition away from fossil fuels, and that Kamala Harris saying that, she wants to end fracking. Terrible mistake. We're hearing this over and over and over again in the media, just like they tried to tell us that Howard Dean was demented. Okay, so anyhow, here's the question. Here's the poll. Question number 1. The primary goal of Pennsylvania's energy policy should be to generate 100% of its electricity from clean energy sources like solar and wind. Do you agree, disagree, or not sure? Not sure was 7%. Disagree was 27%. Only a quarter of Pennsylvanians disagree with that statement. 66% agreed. 2/3 of people in Pennsylvania say yes, 100% wind and solar. Number 2, generally speaking, which do you think is more likely to produce a greater number of good jobs for Pennsylvanians? Now, again, ask yourself, have you heard this in the media? Generally speaking, which do you think is likely to produce a greater number of good jobs for Pennsylvanians? Number 1, increasing production of renewable energy, such as wind and solar. Number 2, increasing production of fossil fuels, such as gas through fracking. Number 3, not sure. 22% said not sure. Only a third, 30%, said increasing fossil fuels. 48%, about half of all Pennsylvanians, said the best way to create a large number of good jobs for Pennsylvanians was increasing production of renewable energy such as wind and solar. The third question: if the federal government doesn't regulate methane emissions from Pennsylvania's natural gas industry, the Pennsylvania state government should enact stronger methane emission regulations. Do you agree or disagree? Crack down on the frackers, in other words. Agree or disagree? The agree percentage in Pennsylvania was 74%. 24% disagreed. Excuse me, it was 76%. It was more than 3/4. 24% disagreed. The fourth question was, do you think the Pennsylvania state government is doing too much, the right amount, or not enough to protect Pennsylvanians from pollution from hydraulic fracturing known as fracking? Is Pennsylvania doing enough to protect us from fracking pollution? 10% said the state's doing too much. 44% said the state's probably doing about the right amount. 46%, about half, the majority. It was a plurality, but it's a majority. Well, arguably, in any case, the plurality, the 46% said, no, Pennsylvania's not doing enough to regulate pollution from fracking. Here's another one. Do you support or oppose providing government assistance, including job training and guaranteeing wages? This is part of Biden's plan. To workers who lose jobs in the coal and natural gas industries as a result of transitioning Pennsylvania to renewable energy. Do you support or oppose providing government assistance, including job training and guaranteed wages? Socialism! The percentage who said, I'm not sure, 11%. The percent of people who said, no, I'm against that, 11%. 78% support in Pennsylvania. 3/4 of all the citizens of Pennsylvania said, yeah, of course, as we transition the state to renewable energy. And finally, question number 6, do you support or oppose investing in a jobs program for unemployed oil and gas workers to safely close down tens of thousands of abandoned oil and gas wells across the country, which are a source of water and methane pollution? Do you support or oppose investing in a jobs program for the people who are going to be unemployed by shutting down the oil and gas industry? 10% said not sure, 16% said no, we're opposed to that. 74% of Pennsylvania residents said, yes, I support a jobs program for unemployed oil and gas workers to safely close down tens of thousands of oil and gas wells. Yes, I support that. Are you getting this? I mean, it's not like this is invisible or hidden. When the media says, oh, wow, Joe Biden made a terrible mistake by talking about we need to get off oil, it's going to hurt him in Pennsylvania, they're wrong. Now, the question in my mind, particularly when I hear this coming out of the mouths of commentators, not just commentators, reporters on CNN and MSNBC, and I've heard it from both, is, do they know that they're lying? Anyhow, Don Siegelman, Governor Don Siegelman will be with us right after the break.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
For a short visit about election theft. He was the victim of one, and then we will be picking up your phone calls. Stick around. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We're reading today from a book by Four Arrows, also known as Donald Jacobs, or Don Jacobs. It's titled Point of Departure, Returning to Our More Authentic Worldview for Education and Survival. This is from Chapter 3, Community-Oriented Self-Authorship. Knowing the power of intentional and unintentional trance-based learning and how the latter can make us susceptible to believing untoward communication from authority figures, we can understand one reason self-authorship is important in the indigenous worldview. When we are in control of our thinking and trust our intuitive insights, our natural trance awareness helps prevent misdirection from external influences. It gives us the authority for what we can then instill in our minds to achieve. If someone such as a trusted shaman or psychologist has, certain skills at hypnosis, we might tentatively authorize him or her to help us form the most effective images, but we do so with full awareness. More important than avoiding negative influence from perceived authority figures, however, is the self-authorship via indigenous worldview that gives high degrees of individual autonomy to people while at the same time assuring that people use their freedoms to help their communities. In the indigenous worldview, the highest authority for all decisions comes from one's personal, honest reflection on lived experience, with the understanding that everything is related. It is this understanding that makes a distinction between self-authorship, as it is generally perceived in the dominant worldview, and that of the indigenous one. Self-authorship is always ultimately in the service of the greater good in the latter. Self-authorship in indigenous ways of thinking comes from knowing that the highest experience for decisions comes from honest reflection on lived experience in light of realizing that everything is related in life, and this interconnectedness must be a part of all decisions. Michael Anthony Hart gets to these ideas about inner authority coming from such reflection. Through inward exploration, tapping into creative forces that run through all life, individuals come to subjectively experience a sense of wholeness. This exploration is an experience in context, where the context is the self in connection with happenings, and the findings from such experience is knowledge. Happenings may be facilitated through rituals or ceremonies that incorporate dreaming, visioning, meditation, and prayer. The findings from such experiences are encoded in community praxis as a way of synthesizing knowledge derived from introspection. Hence, indigenous peoples' cultures recognize and affirm the spiritual through practical applications of inner space. Such a holistic understanding of accessing, trusting, and exercising our inner authority is the source of the creativity and knowledge synthesis we need for addressing our global problems. While Ehrman refers to this inner authority with the Cree term Mamatawisin, which is the capacity to tap the creative life forces of the inner space by the use of all the faculties that consume our being, it is to exercise inwardness. This understanding is missing from our dominant worldview, where objective-based outward exploration is sought for guidance rather than introspective knowledge development. Dependence on external authority is the rule in spite of the call to question authority that has always resonated on the fringes. Under the dominant worldview, obedience trumps community-oriented self-authorship. Decision-making is rarely a holistic process, nor does it utilize alternative states of awareness, deep reflection, and community praxis. The random quotations below, selected from an internet search, reveal that obedience to authority is common under the dominant worldview. Obedience to lawful authority is the foundation of manly characteristics by Robert E. Lee. All religions have morality on obedience, have based morality on obedience, Alexander Herzen. Obedience brings peace in decision-making, James Faust. Justice is the insurance that we have on our lives and property. Obedience is the premium we pay for it, William Penn. I was not born to be free. I was born to adore and obey, C.S. Lewis. Every game has rules. Life's a game that has its respective rules. Obey the rules, win the game, Israel Ahavor. A wolf cannot have more than one head, or it tears itself apart, Con Iggulden. From a social dissident on the fringe, Noam Chomsky wrote, any dictator would admire the uniformity and obedience of the U.S. media. From an indigenous-raised Lakota, Oyessa, the American Indian was an individualist in religion as in war. Reliance on external authority is not only the bedrock of choices in mainstream society and the main approach to moral development, but it also gives jurisprudence guides jurisprudence and conflict resolution. Authorized punishment or revenge is a primary goal for wrongdoing. Under indigenous worldview, bringing offenders back into community via affected members of the community is the goal. This relational approach expands the circle of land and seeks input from the wide circle of relevant people. Spiritual resources are employed via prayer or song, and subjectivity is as important as objectivity. Hart emphasizes this relationship as emphasizing spirit and spirituality, and in turn a sense of communitism and respectful individualism. And then he goes on about the indigenous worldview and how it relates to what we would call communism. Point of departure by Four Arrows.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So what makes Trump supporters Trump supporters? Good question, right? Well, Psychology Today did a deep dive into a whole bunch of literature on this and a number of studies and concluded that there were 5 characteristics that crossed right across virtually all Trump supporters. I do a deep dive on these on our video over at thomhartmann.com for the supporters of our program today. But here's essentially what it says. Number 1, they are authoritarians, by and large authoritarian followers. They want a strong father figure to make them feel safe. Number 2, social dominance orientation. They believe in a caste system and they think they should be in the top caste. Number 3, prejudice. They view people of other races poorly. Number 4, intergroup contact. Most of them have never experienced significant contact with people of another race or people, deeply different than them. And number 5, relative deprivation. They feel like they've been screwed. They're not sure why. And Trump tells them, oh, it's those brown people. It's all over at thomhartmann.com. Right now, let's talk with somebody who really understands these issues. He was the Attorney General for the state of Alabama from 1987 to 1991. He was the Secretary of State from 1979 to 1987. He was the Lieutenant Governor from 1995 to 1999. He was the Governor from 1999 to 2003. He's the author of a new book, Stealing Our Democracy, for which I wrote a blurb, and I'm very proud of. Former Governor Don Siegelman of Alabama. StealingOurDemocracy.com and DonSiegelman.org are his websites. You can tweet him at Don Siegelman. Governor Siegelman, welcome back to the program. Tell us the story of how your 2002 election was stolen and what we can take away from that, what we need to learn from that.
Well, quite simply, I won the election when the votes were counted. When the votes were counted the night of the election, ABC, NBC, CBS, declared that I was the winner. And after the polls were closed and poll workers were sent home, in one Republican-controlled county, 6,000 of my votes were electronically transferred from me to my opponent, and my Republican opponent was declared the winner. He was illegally certified by the Republican Attorney General the next morning. And then he stopped our recount and threatened to put anybody in jail who so much as touched any of the ballots. We were foreclosed because the state Supreme Court had been taken over by Republicans at the hands of Karl Rove, and we had just witnessed Bush v. Gore, where the U.S. Supreme Court had handed the presidential election to Bush. So all was lost in my case. So I said, we were going to walk away, and not unlike Al Gore in 2000, he too felt like he was thrown into a catch-22, and there wasn't anything he could do about it. So I said I was going to run again. But my point is that if a local yokel who was trained by the software provider can hack an election in Alabama and steal an election for governor, think about what can be done on the national level. And with elections being conducted in secret, the counting is in secret. There's no audit after the election. We don't know what's going on. So I just, encourage your listeners, one, to be alert, two, to vote. And I think the cure to stealing election is for us to vote in such numbers that they can't possibly steal that many votes. But
has anything happened in Alabama since the 2002 election was stolen from you? Has anything happened in that state that would make that more difficult in the future?
No, and there's nothing that's been done on a national level. We watched in the 2004 Kerry Bush race that there were anomalies in Ohio and other places that raised alarms about what was really going on. And of course, in 2016 we had allegations of Russian meddling in our elections, and now we have even more signs that there are attempts to infiltrate our voting systems. And if people just think about it, we work on computers all the time. Everybody gets hacked. People get their contact list stolen from them. They get their identity stolen from them. It's the same process that can be put in place that can steal elections. After my election in 2002, we had the Republican Party gave credit to a couple of people for swinging the election to my opponent. One was a guy named Dan Gans, who had been trained by the software provider as an election security expert, who was working for my opponent, and then who immediately left the state and went to work for a Tom DeLay, a Jack Abramoff company, the Alexandria Group, which had all sorts of nefarious connections. There are just too many dangerous opportunities for misconduct, and in this election, we're going to see a challenge of en masse of absentee ballots by the Republicans, orchestrated by Karl Rove. He's a master at this, but we've just got to be alert, and we've got to after the election. I think what we need to do is to have a national ballot and election audit commission established by Congress that can really dive in and look at election anomalies and try to figure out a way to stop it.
Yeah. Also, I would think, we're talking with Governor Don Siegelman, his new book, Stealing Our Democracy, stealingourdemocracy.com. Governor, I would think that if we were to pass a constitutional amendment or even a very, very strong piece of legislation that explicitly said Americans have a right to vote, then those voters whose votes were switched from your column to Bob Riley's column, your competitor, your Republican competitor, those voters would have a basis to sue the government saying you violated my right, you stole my vote. Right now, in most states, I'm not sure that they would have that right. That seems to me like a really important thing to do, as well as, this commission and the things that you're talking about, that I think a lot of those are in H.R. 1, which was the first piece of legislation passed by the House of Representatives in this last Congress, which Mitch McConnell has refused to even have a hearing about in the United States Senate. Does that make sense to you?
Oh yes. I think we've got to ensure that every vote that's cast is counted and counted accurately, and there's got to be consequences for those people who are trying to impact the outcome of elections in inappropriate ways. If you look at this country's history, it was founded on efforts to predetermine the outcome of elections. We excluded Indians, slaves, and women, and then we excluded freed slaves, we excluded felons, we instituted literacy tests, poll taxes, restrictions on the time and place to register, limiting the number of hours that people could vote. Then we followed that with Ku Klux Klan lynchings to intimidate voters, voter IDs, gerrymandering, and so we've got a country that is rich in this effort to predetermine the outcome of an election, and now we have this electronic voting and computers that are counting in secret with no independent audits conducted. It's just scary. I'm not saying that the election is rigged. I'm just saying that we need to be aware that it can happen. It has happened. Elections have been stolen. They can be stolen, and we need to be alert to that. And I think the word to your listeners is vote and vote, to get all your friends to vote. We've got to make sure that everybody that can vote is out there on Election Day. Yeah. Absolutely. Governor, we just have 40 seconds, so we're going to hit a hard break here that I can't control. I did not realize that Karl Rove was running or advising the Republican operation or the Trump operation. Is that the case right now? Well, that's my understanding. He was called to the White House. He came to the White House. These are two people who in 2016 were calling each other names. One said one was a moron. The other one said the other one was an idiot. But now that they need each other, they came together. The scary thing is, Karl Rove. The scary thing is, you can finish your thoughts, sir, very quickly. Okay. Well, the scary thing is, Karl Rove is back in control. So we have to keep a close watch on it. There you go. Governor Don Siegelman, his new book, Stealing Our Democracy. It's brilliant. You need to get a copy. StealingOurDemocracy.com is the website. Governor, thanks so much for dropping by. Great talking with you. Absolutely. Thank you.
To Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com.
We'll be right back.
For audio and video archives.
We'll be right back. It's 45 minutes past the hour. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Picking up your calls right after this. And welcome back. Let's see here. Bill in St. Helens, Oregon. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. So for the last, at least the last three SCOTUS nominations, the Republican Senate has advised the sitting president that they would consent to anyone that he nominated, even before he nominated anyone. Now, if I had a jury trial for a murder and the freshly seated jury just sat down and handed the bailiff a paper, and they handed that to the judge, and the judge says, "We find the defendant guilty, slant bar, not guilty," would anybody recognize the legitimacy of that? Would anybody? The jury would be dismissed. Why aren't we questioning the wholesale corruption of the process? There's no separation of powers. There's no checks and balances. The entire process is corrupt. I will argue with anybody. Nobody needs to pack the court assuming the Democrats take both houses and And the presidency, you literally remove these people. Gorsuch especially. Gorsuch was a stolen appointment. You just remove them. You pass the things. I know people can say it's not in the Constitution, but it's not in the Constitution what Mitch McConnell and the Republicans have pulled either. So let's not play the game about it's not in the Constitution. Let's play the game of what's fair and legitimate. And these 3 appointments were not fair or legitimate, and that's on that basis they should be removed. That's simple. One quick thing.
Well, and I still want to know why Anthony Kennedy resigned when he's relatively young and in great health, and what relationship that may have to his son being in the middle of a scandal with Donald Trump, because his son was Donald Trump's private banker at Deutsche Bank and handed Donald Trump $1 billion when Donald Trump was merely a mob-connected, corrupt real estate developer in New York State. Which is the second of the 3, and then the third of the 3 we're watching right now. But I've got questions about all 3 of these things, Bill.
Yeah, one more quick segue, not the same issue, but I wanted to get it in. We need to pass a law saying that statutes of limitations for presidents stop the day they enter office, and they start when they get out. Just like when you leave a state, the statute of limitations stop. They start when you come back to the state 20 years later. It doesn't matter. Time
Are
to
you
do
sure?
that.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if every state does it, but a lot of states, if you leave the state, there's a 5-year statute of limitations and you leave the state, it freezes because you're avoiding prosecution. So it freezes and it goes back into effect when you come back. And I don't know which states, but I know that some of them have that rule. So, but it should freeze.
No
if we can't prosecute the guy, maybe some of your callers do, but if we can't prosecute the guy during his terms of office, then the statute of limitations needs to freeze. That cannot be a free get out of jail free card, Tom. It just cannot.
Yeah, I don't remember the details, which particular Trump crime it was. There are so many, it's hard to keep track of. But there are a couple of major crimes that Trump committed that the statute of limitations is going to be running out in next year, basically. In the first half of next year. And I'm pretty sure that tax fraud was one of them in New York. I think that's probably why they're in such a hurry to nail him. And I think one of the sexual assault charges actually is looking at a statute of limitations end too. Although there people are going to civil, like E. Jean Carroll, she's going with a civil lawsuit. Bill, thank you. I learn something every day from my listeners. And it's such an honor to hang out with you folks. Just some of the most thoughtful, wise, well-informed activist. I'm thinking of the caller in the last hour who was talking about her network of women friends all around the country who were. It's just, y'all are wonderful. Thank you. We'll be right back. The hidden history of the Supreme Court tells the story of Nixon and Reagan's committing treason to steal the White House. So what makes Trump supporters Trump supporters? Good question, right? Well, Psychology Today did a deep dive into a whole bunch of literature on this and a number of studies and concluded that there were 5 characteristics that crossed right across virtually all Trump supporters. And I do a deep dive on these on our video over at thomhartmann.com for the supporters of our program today. But here's essentially what it says. Number 1, they are authoritarians, by and large authoritarian followers. They want a strong father figure to make them feel safe. Number 2, social dominance orientation. They believe in a caste system and they think they should be in the top caste. Number 3, prejudice. They view people of other races poorly. Number 4, intergroup contact. Most of them have never experienced significant contact with people of another race or people, deeply different than them. And number 5, relative deprivation. They feel like they've been screwed. They're not sure why. And Trump tells them, oh, it's those brown people. It's all over at thomhartmann.com. And we'll welcome back. 9 minutes before the hour, Thom Hartmann here with you. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, not too much, Tom. Hey, I wanted to run something by you as far as, people being on edge, your characterization of people being on edge. I think I know why that is. I think it is, it's really emotive conditioning or emotional propaganda that is being, sent out and received by Americans and being sent out by Beijing and Moscow. And I'm not the only one that is kind of aware of this. Actually, CNN's been doing a pretty good job on, like, fleshing out the Steve Bannon and Miles Gao connection with, you know, China putting out a bioweapon. And CNN is, like, right on the edge of agreeing with me on this. And, you know, and this is emotional. It has an effect. And you mentioned the guy that put the sign, you know, he vandalized the Biden-Harris sign. And he put, you know, we know who you are. We're the people with the guns. That almost replicates exactly what Iran did to various voters, that the emails they got off the voter rolls that they stole. And see what they're doing, and this is classic. They're retransmitting. They're what we call a retrans entity. Right? These Trump voters. They're retransmitting propaganda that basically is. What we're seeing is the demise of liberal democracy in America. We're becoming illiberal.
And not just America. I mean, Louise and I the other day, Dave, we were watching the news, and they were talking. We were watching BBC News because on the weekend on American news, everything is the same story being recited over and over and over again. And so we flipped over to the BBC, and there was this story about how Spain just went into a major, not a lockdown, but an overnight curfew and, you know, limits on behavior and things like that. And there were a bunch of Spaniards who showed up in the streets to protest this. You know, they're anti-mask and they're anti-lockdown, blah, 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 blah. And BBC just covered it as a straight story. And I turned to Louise and I said, I'll bet you anything that those people were activated via Facebook from a foreign country, from one of these countries that is sending, you know, bad stuff into here. You know, whether it's Russia or whether it's Saudi Arabia or whether it's Iran or whether it's China or whatever it may be. I'll bet you that was not a local indigenous Spaniard, protest. Now, I could be wrong. I'm just speculating, but it seems like that's what's happening here, and I think it's happening all around the world, Dave. I mean, you worked in the intelligence community for a couple of decades. Is that your sense as well?
Well, let me give you a couple examples that concern me. Number one, General Milley, you know, chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Remember when Trump did the Bible thing? General Milley clearly said, look, I am not a combatant commander. I advise the president. That worries me because, let me give you another example. General Neary, who is a combatant commander. He was the general that was relieved of command. He's in charge of Europe, and the Marine Corps general is in charge of Europe and AFRICOM, okay, the AFRICOM command. And he said to some of his Marines, he used the N-word. He was talking about rap music being played over the speakers. And he said, why does this rap music constantly laced with the N-word, but nobody else can say it? Now, he was relieved because that was racism conversation, right? Well, you have said on your program numerous times, we need to have an honest conversation about race. Now, General Neary may have simply been trying to do that, but it is incommensurate with his rank. Do you understand? This guy is a general officer and a combatant commander. Long story short, I think the Russians in Beijing have been micro-targeting important leaders. All right, and these people have, yes. And
in other words, he said something that no commander should say. Commander is not a talk show host. It's not his job to provoke conversations about controversial topics. But this guy did it, and you think he did it because he was micro-targeted by a foreign country.
Yes, and you understand why that's important, right? It's incommensurate with his rank. All right, he has thousands of African-American soldiers that are obligated to die on his command. Okay? They are obligated to forfeit their lives. Now, what kind of confidence are you going to have in a leader like that, Tom? And look, another example, Joe Biden. I think Joe Biden's already acting responsibly as the president of the United States. Look, during that debate, when Donald Trump was saying, Joe, you had 40 years. Why didn't you do anything? Joe Biden could have simply said, Donald, we are not a dictatorship. But the problem with that is, all right, China and Russia have all had such success making us illiberal that it would be irresponsible. All right, eventually Trump or Biden, whoever wins, are going to have to confront Beijing and Russia. And they're going to say, look, I know you don't like what we've done, but we are a democracy. They're not going to listen. That is going to fall on deaf ears. They're not going to care.
And if China moves against Taiwan, which it looks like they're preparing to do, it could be very problematic. It could, regardless of who's in the White House. So we're looking at some real dangerous times. Dave, I got to run, but thanks for the call and thanks for your analysis. We got a lot of work to do. That said, there are a lot of really good people in this country. And, the crackpots and the gun nuts and the racists and the fools among us are very much the minority. They get a lot of publicity, but they're very much the minority. Let's keep that in mind. We'll be back. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of shopping for insurance. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Help. More info at teethhealth.com, code TOM. HelloFresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Tom. And CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Health Justice Now, Single Payer and What Comes Next by Timothy Faust. And this is from the introduction. A secret scream rings through America. It rings down the sterile fluorescent hallways of our hospitals. It rings over our rural towns and our native reservations. It rings through our prisons, the bellies of our great cities. It rings in our farms and our fields, our streets and our sewers, our bodies and our blood. And we are cursed to never hear it clearly until at last we realize it has been our own mouth screaming and we are lost. A child born today inherits in that secret a new American squalor, the skeletal remains of the American cities, the bleached bones of the American suburbs. This secret is a birthright of continual exploitation, pumped for labor and drained of cash and then punished for the resulting suffering. Punished for being hungry, punished for being sick, punished for being pregnant, punished for being poor, punished for being black or brown, punished for being queer, for being unlucky, for being. At the base of that suffering is lodged a little truth, like a knot in the stomach. In America, sickness makes you poor, and poorness makes you sick. This is a book about that relationship and why it happens, and why it's unnecessary, and what we can do to fix it. The cosmic whirling of God's great slot machine has not determined that some people are fated to suffer while others flourish. We have the resources to take care of everyone, and yet we refuse to do so. Your medical debt and medical bills are unnecessary, but we have chosen to make them necessary. These are structural problems with structural causes, and many of them share roots in how we pay for health care. This is a book about health care and health finance. They are different. Healthcare is anything that helps you stay safe and healthy. It's a kind of freedom from and within your own body. Health finance is the method by which we as a country pay for that freedom and by which we decide who gets to have it and who doesn't. Healthcare is more than what happens to you in the hospital. Healthcare is whether your home makes you sick, or your food makes you sick, or your environment makes you sick, or whether you have enough money to afford the things that keep you healthy. In America, the structure of corporate healthcare has convinced us that some people deserve healthcare and some people don't. This is a book about that corporate health finance, about private insurance and private insurers. For half a century, they've convinced us that they're the only things that keep us or could ever keep us from the utter financial ruination of illness. They've sold us different inadequate insurance plans and persuaded us that this is a form of great liberty while chipping away at our freedoms for profit and holding our bodies and our children's bodies hostage. This is a book about single-payer healthcare, a health finance model in which we pool our abundant collective resources to provide health care to all people. It is a common model across the world. As we will discuss in this book, we have the potential not just to enact a single-payer program in America, but to build the greatest health care program among any so-called developed democracy. Here is my profession of faith. I believe beyond any doubt that single-payer is demonstrably sound and imminently feasible. I believe a properly ambitious and well-structured single-payer program will do more than any other American social program of this generation to soothe the burns, to resuscitate the spirit, to nourish the moral will of the American people. I believe it will loosen the loathsome manacles of American health finance, an exploitative institution that profits by plundering from us our own bodily autonomy, and that anchors a larger exploitation that holds those whom we love as captive leverage to guarantee our servitude to abusive employers or domestic partners, to those who seek to dominate us both in the office and in the hospital. I believe this nation owes its people, whose labor has created its rich banquet, the safety and agency of healthcare. I believe this healthcare is greater in scope than that which happens upon an operating table. I believe that housing, food, income, and more, the components of basic human dignity, are healthcare. And I believe our work is that of striving toward justice for all people. And I therefore believe, I have to believe, that single-payer healthcare is our moral imperative. Single-payer is our tool. Single-payer is our weapon. Single-payer is our first step. But single-payer on its own is not the goal. This book is about health justice. Healthcare is personal, so I want to start this book personally by introducing two friends of mine, Steve Way and Kyle Kolick. They're two guys about my age, I'm 30, who live in North New Jersey. They're sweet, gentle people and probably the most charismatic pair of friends I've met in my entire life. They make me laugh until my face hurts, and we like watching pro wrestling together. They're also being utterly broken by our American healthcare system, and it's keeping them from living their lives. Steve has muscular dystrophy. The muscle and tissues that hold his body together are eating themselves. He's doing pretty good, all things considered. He beat his original life expectancy of 18 and now probably has a long life ahead of him. Steve needs a wheelchair to move and a ventilator to help him breathe. The book, Health Justice Now, Timothy Faust.
Yeah.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, 8 days out from the election, and in the previous hour, we heard from former Senator. Let me start over again. In the previous hour, we heard from former Alabama Governor Don Siegelman about how his vote got stolen in the 2002 election. In one particular Republican-controlled area, a guy who actually had been trained on how to use the software and the voting machines had, and the tabulators, and was in charge of this tabulator in this county, transferred 6,000, with an even number, 6,000 votes out of his column and into his opponent's column, giving the election to Bob Riley. And, it's just the beginning of a whole wild story that Don Siegelman has to tell. So today, how do we protect our vote? How do we make sure things like that don't happen? Well, Brian Baird is one of my favorite former congressmen. And when he was in Congress, he was one of my favorite members of Congress. A good guy. I remember when Brian Baird, when I used to do a local show here in Portland, and he was representing southern Washington State, just north of us. And he came in one day to tell us about how he had just discovered a bunch of Republicans were trading stocks on inside information inside their government offices. It was mind-boggling. Brian Barrett, good guy, and he was the chair of the Science and Technology subcommittees on energy and the environment, and on the Research, Technology, and Education subcommittees in the U.S. House of Representatives. He's got a new website, Don't F With My Vote, and the website is DF, like don't F, WMV with my vote.org, dfwmv.org. If you can remember, don't F with my, and you can spell out the word. I can't say it on the air. Don't F with my vote.org. You've got it. And on the line with us right now is the very same former Congressman Brian Baird himself. And Congressman, welcome back to the program. Tell us about dfwmv.org. Don't F with my vote.
Tom, it's so good to see you, first of all. Yeah, well, it's just been too long. Well, here's the thing. When the U.S. Postal Service started talking about, we just may not deliver votes on time, or when they began to take out mailboxes and things like that, I thought, my gosh, if I put my ballot in the mail, it's an act of faith. I have no way of proving that I actually did that, right? So what would happen if you put your ballot in the mail and then you discovered after the election it never got counted? And what if large numbers of ballots from a certain area didn't get counted? There's no current way, except for our web address, dfwmv.org, as you said, to record that you win and where you put your ballot in a way that we could get back in touch with you. And the same applies really, Tom, if you're voting at the polls and you've been waiting in line for 3 hours. And we know this happens. You wait in line 2 or 3 hours, 8 o'clock comes, somebody says, polling is closed, y'all have to go home. Well, how do you prove you were there? How do you say, wait a minute, I have a constitutional right to vote. These people are preventing me from doing that. How does a judge say, well, Mr. Hartmann, how do we have any proof that you were actually outside the polling booth? With dfwmv.org, you do have proof. Here's what you do. You just enter your name and address so we can reach back to you if we need to contact you. You can geolocate either by typing in your address or by literally using the geolocate function on your mobile device. And then you take a picture of yourself in front of the ballot box or outside the voting booth. It's that simple. It takes less than 2 minutes. We'll keep the record. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated solely to ensuring fair elections. We will never use your data for anything other than that purpose. And we're the only tool of its kind designed to protect particularly your mail-in vote. There are a couple other devices that are useful for in-person voting, but it's that simple. And there's nothing like it. And in this election, where swing states could hinge on just a tiny difference, might make a real difference.
Yeah. So, hey, buddy, don't F with my vote. Don't F with my vote.
Exactly
.org,
right.
DFWMV. Yeah, .org is the website.
Or fiddle or fuss, whatever you like. But
right. Hey, Brian, did I'm sorry I don't recall how it all ended up. When you had discovered that there were a bunch of Republicans who were trading on inside information inside Congress, and you went on a crusade to try to end that. What's the status of that at this moment?
Well, we didn't actually have proof.
The reason I ask, and forgive the digression, digression here, is I am convinced that several members of Trump's cabinet, in particular Wilbur Ross, who's has been called a grifter by Forbes magazine in the last year, are trading on inside information right now, and that the Trump crime family have been making a fortune on inside information. And I'm just wondering what the status of the legality of all that kind of thing is.
Yeah, well, the quick summary is, first of all, we didn't really have proof that people were doing it, but common sense said somebody would. Because here was the deal. it was not bright line illegal for members of Congress or their staff or family members to make trades based on confidential information received from their professional duties, their elected duties. We know it's bright line illegal for corporations, but the question was, we're not members of a corporation, but we get some pretty darn valuable and unique information. What constrains us from doing that? Well, I checked with the SEC and other attorneys and found that there was not a bright line information. And plus, Tom, on top of that, members of Congress, unlike corporate CEOs, we didn't at the time have to report our stock trades except for a year later. 1 year later, we'd sort of batch it and report in this public disclosure. But that's so late. So I wrote a bill called the Stock Act, and STOCK stood for Stop Trading on Congressional Knowledge. And the Stock Act eventually did pass. Only after 60 Minutes did an expose and raise the very kind of questions you just talked about. What the Stock Act did is it required members of Congress to report within 45 days if they made trades. And then on top of that, it made it bright line illegal to make a trade yourself, to give other people information, if you knew it was not public, or your family or staff. And you know what, Tom?
Does this apply to the White House?
It does apply to the executive branch as well. Now, the Republicans basically say that Trump and presumably by extension his family, who he would pardon, are somehow immune to the law itself, but it does apply to the executive branch as well. And it actually, in that case of the Congress, Richard Burr, the former now chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, made trades post-classified briefings on COVID, made trades that were very favorable to his portfolio. And
so did Kelly Loeffler.
That came out. Yeah, and Loeffler, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, good stuff. So Brian, we have about a minute and a half left before we hit a hard break here. Back to don'tfwithmyvote.org, your website, which is great. Number one, I'm assuming that this works no matter what state you're in, anywhere in the country, even though you're from Washington State, which has a really good election system. And number two, is this the kind of thing that was built into H.R. 1? I'm not all that familiar with at a granular level.
This has not existed before. It should, and I presume it will in the next election, but we don't have time to wait for the next election. For example, Tom, there was a ballot box set in fire, one in California, one recently in Massachusetts, I believe. If your ballot is in that box and it's set on fire and is destroyed, first of all, how does anybody know to get back in touch with you to say, hey, gosh, your ballot was destroyed, you want to file a provisional? But in a swing area, that could make a huge difference, just a couple thousand votes in a ballot box. And that's already happening, not in an organized way, but that's happening. We've seen Postal Service workers not deliver ballots, and you just described sort of nefarious inside jobs that could happen. The key point here is you should want to protect your ballot, and you should want to keep a record of where and when you voted. We're not asking how you voted. That's your business. We would never ask that. But if you take a photo and make a record on dfwmv.org, and it turns out that this election major blockage of votes happens, you have a record of that, and we have a record we can help follow up on.
There you go. Don't F with my vote, dfwmv.org, the website. Brian Baird, former 3rd District Washington State Congressman, U.S. Congressman with us. Congressman Baird, thanks so much for dropping by. Great talking with you.
Thanks, Tom. Great to see you again.
Yeah, thank you. We'll be back. It's 15 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of the news of the day. And yeah, Trump did shut down the Vaccine Safety Office. I got to tell you about that. And then we'll be picking up your calls, too. And welcome back. Let's see here. Dave in Las Vegas. Hey, Dave. Thanks for calling, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Thanks for taking my call. Just like a message for the Trump supporters. What do they think our country would be like? What would the world be like if these multilateral corporations totally got their way? Like we'd be totally at the mercy of the billionaire bosses.
The world would be like it was in 1770 when the British East India Company was 10 times larger than Amazon, the largest corporation in America, I think. It was the biggest corporation the world had ever seen, and basically controlled the world, and the British aristocracy controlled the East India Company. A small number of very, very wealthy white guys control everything. That's what it would be like.
Hey, another point I wanted to make. Did you, Heidi Heidkamp was on Bill Maher last Friday night. She told Bill Maher that the people of North Dakota reappropriated their funds towards fracking just before they had this. Their country now is on fire with COVID. The city of Fargo, they don't even have any ICU beds left.
So what's the point, Dave? Or the question?
Well, it was just, I just thought it was, because we were talking about fracking so much this morning. So what?
Oh, I see. Yeah. I get it. I got it now. I got it. Dave, thanks. Thanks for sharing that with us, and thanks for the call. It's great to hear from you. Abe in Bangor, Wisconsin. Hey, Abe, what's up?
Yes, thanks for taking the call. I have a possible voter suppression idea going on here. In order to avoid all that, you covered all these methods. So we received our ballots and actually dropped them off at our town hall last September 23rd. That's a month ago. And in the intern, we got a approximately 4x9-inch red, white, and blue postcard in the mail, and it's addressed from the Republican Party, Wisconsin being one of the important swing states. And it says, voter alert, public records indicate you have not returned your ballot. And so I looked up the number, and I called the Republican Party, Wisconsin, and he was like, oops, that was a mistake. That should never have been sent out. And that was all he said. I'm calling to let you know that this is going on, and this could be an idea hatched to get, since my vote was an absentee ballot, and they're sending these to absentee ballot voters also. Right.
Abe, are you registered as a Democrat?
I voted as a Democrat, yeah.
No, are you registered to vote as a Democrat? Do you vote in Democratic primaries?
Yes, we already voted. I actually
because you can, everybody's all hysterical right now because Iran and Russia have acquired voter lists. You can buy voter lists. They're public records. There are companies that compile them. They'll sell it to Russia. They'll sell it to you or me. And they'll sell it to the Republican Party of Wisconsin. So it may well be that they're sending this out to registered Democrats to try to screw with their brains or their votes or get them to vote twice.
That's what I was thinking, voting twice and then kick you off the ballot. Yep.
Well, or put you in jail for that matter. Yeah. Amazing. Abe, thanks for the heads up on that. I'm not sure exactly how to follow up on it, but it's an interesting one to know about. Remarkable. And, hopefully somebody in Wisconsin's listening right now who may, be able to do something or know more about this than I do. It's 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. In our special video over at ThomHartmann.com for supporters of our program, the one today is for anybody who has any connection, or for this week, anybody who has any connection with the military or anybody in the military who might still think that Donald Trump is a good guy. And I'm going through I don't know how many, 20, 30, 40, 50 individual data points of times when Trump has trashed our troops, when Trump has deported troops, when Trump has deported military spouses who aren't citizens, when Trump has lied to our troops, when Trump has, specifically pulled money from our troops. I mean, he took money out of military housing, which is in some parts of the country, mold infested and really in a crisis, to build his border wall that Mexico is supposed to pay for. That's just one example. So there's a whole list of these things in that new video that's available over at ThomHartmann.com, especially for anybody who has any consideration or concern at all for our U.S. military. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And John in Kearney, Nebraska. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Tom, a couple of points, and I'd like to hear your thoughts. The phrase I continue to hear by politicians and others that drives me crazy is, the American people are smarter than that. The American people will figure it out. Well, Tom, I believe that about 50% maybe of the American people are not smarter than that. And in that group, I would include, the 30% or so, the really hardcore, MAGA hat wearing, Trump rally attending group, and then another 20% or so to include religious fanatics who believe the earth was created in 6 days and is 6 to 12,000 years old. And if they want to attend a large religious gathering, God will protect them from the virus. And then finally, those, no matter the candidates or the circumstances, they could never bring themselves to vote for a Democrat. They would be disowned by their families and shunned by their friends if they ever found out they voted for a Democrat. Just like to hear your thoughts.
I think your point is well taken, John. I would say that we tend to treat this as if it's a situation that is unique to America, and it's not. The fact is that people are vulnerable to disinformation. They're vulnerable to lies and smears. They're vulnerable to, in some cases, very carefully crafted messaging techniques that are used by groups who don't have our best interests in mind. And we're all receiving these all the time. Facebook has weaponized this with their algorithm, where they basically sort people into camps and categories based on their personal preferences and how they conduct their lives and how they react and interact with Facebook. And as a result of this, if you want to reach white suburban moms who live within 10 miles of a city center, where there's more than 10% African Americans, but these are the white people that you might be able to freak out, you can buy that list from Facebook or something like that. I mean, I don't know about that specific list, but that's absolutely what's going on. And so that doesn't mean that people are necessarily stupid, but people are vulnerable and in some cases gullible. And and frankly, I think that that's a marvelous quality, to be trusting, right? Gullibility is simply being trusting. It's a good thing in theory, but it puts us in a vulnerable situation. It puts us at risk. Roger in Indianapolis, Indiana. Hey, Roger, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I was calling about your
Roger?
suppression, and yes, hello? I'm here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're on the air, Roger. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I'm in Indianapolis.
There appears to be a slight delay between us, Roger, so just jump in and run.
Okay. I went down. I've been checking periodically on my registration because of your encouragement. The last day of registration, I checked. I had been purged. Mm-hmm. I took care of my voter registration online before I left, and then read a Twitter from my son, where in Hamilton County, which is north of us, the guy was told he could not vote because he had applied for an absentee ballot. He said no. The woman says, well, maybe it was your wife. No. Got his wife on the phone. The wife said, no, I didn't do it. He got a friendly ear finally, and they come to find out that they had electronically put his signature on an absentee ballot form. He says they wouldn't let him leave. He would not go until he was able to vote.
Wow.
And he got able to vote, and that was his thing. Do not, if they tell you you can't vote, don't leave until you can. And don't take a provisional.
Right.
That's it. From red land.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because in red states, provisional ballots typically are not counted. Yeah, right. Okay.
Well,
thanks for the heads up on that,
do.
Roger. That's grim, but I appreciate the feedback.
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Joan in Ludington, Michigan. Hey, Joan. What's up?
I'm not sure how things are working by mail here in Michigan, but
I apparently have about a 3-second delay here, so just jump in and keep talking.
We have a system that works pretty well for in-person voting. You are given a ballot, you fill out the ballot, and then you go put it into a machine that counts the ballot, and if there's any question about the number of votes individuals have, you still have the ballots that you can double-check. I don't know how things are going to work with the mail-in stuff, though. Everybody, I mean, I've done absentee ballots, and that's worked very smoothly, but these are huge numbers of people mailing stuff.
Yeah. I think the good news is that typically there's a paper trail. Once you leave a ballot, a voting place, if you're taking your ballot with you or a copy of your ballot or anything like that, the problem is chain of custody. If there turns out to be any litigation or any hassles around it or anything like that, because you can't prove that you ran home and got a different ballot or something. I think the main thing that we need to do is, frankly, go to nationwide mail-in voting like we've got here in Oregon. It works so well. It's so easy. It's so convenient. It's so straightforward. They've simplified it tremendously. They even pay the postage now on it. They didn't used to. It's great. Joan, thank you for the call. And for your thinking about these things. We're all trying to figure out what's the best way to make this all work, which is a good thing. That's how democracy is supposed to work.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann
We got a
Program.
science guest.
202-808-9925.
Lori Lodes with Climate Power 2020 going to drop by, an Obama administration alumnus, and then we'll be picking up your phone calls, so stick around.
For our Thom Hartmann Book Club excerpt today, we're reading from Ed Morales' new book, Fantasy Island, Colonialism, Exploitation, and the Betrayal of Puerto Rico. This is from the first chapter. There was never any doubt that the United States wanted Puerto Rico for its own when it began a war with Spain near the turn of the 20th century. Cuba had been in the throes of independence war with Spain off and on since 1868, and the conflict that began in 1895 seemed ripe for the United States to capitalize on. The sinking of the USS Maine, an American naval ship destroyed by an explosion while moored just outside Havana, fueled American entry into the war. Although there are conflicting theories about the source of the explosion, including the likelihood it was caused by a spontaneous internal fire, William Randolph Hearst's newspaper chain blew up the incident into the perfect catalyst for the United States to enter the conflict. When Theodore Roosevelt entered the fray with his army of Rough Riders, the whole affair came as no surprise to anyone who'd been paying attention to the lust U.S. government leaders and military had long expressed to expand southward and westward. And although the idea of manifest destiny was at the forefront of the political discourse of this period, it's less often observed that the United States' expansionist gaze was saturated with racial language and attitudes, at once desirous of and repelled by Latin America's mestizo mulatto social dynamic. The Haitian Revolution at the end of the 19th century and into the 20th created a U.S. obsession with both Cuba and Puerto Rico because of the potential of a similar black-led revolt on those islands. In 1826, Virginia Senator John Randolph feared that such a revolt would render the southern United States vulnerable to invasion from Cubans in rowboats. For this reason, he objected to the United States participating in the 1826 Panama Congress because American diplomats would have to endure the horror of a U.S. diplomat taking his seat in the Congress, quote, beside the native African, their American descendants, the mixed breeds, the Indians, and the half-breeds, without any offense or scandal at so motley a mixture, end quote. The logic driving this perspective underlined not only the importance of slavery to the emergence of capitalism in the 19th century, but also, as Matthew Karp points out in this vast southern empire, the extent to which slave owners and their elected representatives disproportionately shaped U.S. foreign policy. Going back as far as the Haitian Revolution, fear of a successful slave rebellion in the newly formed United States strongly motivated Southern politicians. As Karp mentions, to that end, Presidents Madison and Monroe, quote, used overwhelming force to destroy black maroon settlements in southern Florida, end quote. Fear of slave rebellions also briefly united the interests of American slaveholders and Cuban elites who wanted independence from Spain, but in the late 19th century, after abolition, Roosevelt's forces fought in conjunction with Afro-Cuban armies against their common Spanish foe. The move to wrest Cuba and Puerto Rico from Spain came just as Spain had finally relented to end slavery as a concession to black rebel Cuban armies that had formed to push for independence. In a further move to placate continued unrest on the island, in November 1897, Spain signed automatic charters for Cuba and Puerto Rico, which gave limited home rule governments to both islands. Puerto Rico would gain full representation in the Cortes, the Spanish parliament, and could veto Spanish commercial treaties unfavorable to them, while also retaining the rights to set tariffs on imports and exports. In this way, Puerto Ricans were granted a kind of citizenship that allowed self-government, grafted on what was left of their Spanish subjecthood. Yet on July 25th, 1898, 8 days after the first meeting of the newly formed Puerto Rican Parliament, U.S. troops arrived in the southern port of Guanica and replaced the Spanish flag with the stars and stripes. This date would be remembered over 50 years later, when the United States finally followed through on a project to allow Puerto Ricans to have limited autonomy and self-government. But at the time, it was both the end of Teddy Roosevelt's splendid little war and the beginning of the current quandary over what exactly Puerto Rico's new colonial master would do with the island. Although historians agree that there was no pre-existing plan for designating Puerto Rico's status, there was a general belief that Puerto Rico could be incorporated as a U.S. territory, and probably would be. This led many to assume that it would follow a similar path to statehood as former territories like Florida and Louisiana. At the very least, it would, by acceding to military control, receive, quote, the advantages and blessings of enlightened civilization, end quote, as Puerto Rico's first military governor, Nelson A. Miles, declared 3 days after the landing of Guanica. Because Cuba was so militarized during its wars for independence, the United States decided to allow it national sovereignty, thinking it could still exert considerable control over the economy because of existing business interests and a ready-made set of Cuban consumers who were already buying Ford Model Ts. But although Puerto Rico had experienced anti-Spanish uprisings in the mid-19th century, in 1898 they did not have nearly the same level of armed mobilization present. So the United States held on to it, particularly because of its geographic location, which would provide the United States with a stronghold on the easternmost tip of the Caribbean. The book is Fantasy Island by Ed Morales.
The hidden history of the war on voting tells how the GOP has been stealing elections for decades and will again this year unless we stop them. So our newest video for our Thom Hartmann Program supporters over at thomhartmann.com just went up. It's about PFOA, perfluorooctanoic acid, which is one of the chemicals that's used to make Teflon and to make some kinds of plastics, and is extraordinarily toxic, both to the reproductive system. In fact, there's a body of thought that suggests it's associated with a drop in sperm count levels and with damage to the liver. It's extremely persistent, it's bioaccumulative, it's toxic, and the German government just did a study, a 3-year study, 2014 to 2017. They just released the results of 2,500 children all over the country, and the results are truly grim. This was just released by the German Environment Ministry about the levels of this chemical and other precursors, the ingredients that are used to make plastic were found. So you can read all about it or see all about it, hear all about it at thomhartmann.com. And on the line with us is Lori Lodes, the Executive Director for Climate Power 2020 and a former member of the Obama administration. ClimatePower2020.org is the website, and ClimatePower201 is the Twitter handle. And Lori, welcome back to the program. Amy Coney Barrett is on your in your sights here. Tell us about her association with the American Petroleum Institute and Shell Oil, and why that should be a flag with regard to her answers to some of the questions that members of Congress have been putting to her.
Oh, absolutely, Tom, and thanks for having me. So Amy Coney Barrett's father is a long-term exec of Shell Oil, of API, was back in the age of the scientists at the petroleum companies and the gas companies actually saying that climate change is real, but now we need to hide that fact, right? We don't want people to know that climate change is actually happening or that we are responsible for it. So let's cover it up. And Amy Coney Barrett's dad was around during that time. And then you flash forward to today. Amy Coney Barrett will be up for confirmation later this evening. And during her confirmation hearings, she not only doubled down or tripled down, she quadrupled down on the fact that she's a climate denier. And she can put a lot of fancy words around it. But at the end of the day, she is absolutely a climate denier. She once, when she was confronted by Senator Harris, she said, "I'm not a scientist." Now, you might remember, Tom, back many years ago in 2014, this was sort of a favorite slogan from Republican senators until they got called out for just, using it to sort of cover up their science denial. And that fell out of favor because everybody saw right through it. So I think what we have is we have a Supreme Court soon to be, unfortunately, confirmed justice who will tilt the balance of the court 6-3 in favor of pro-corporate polluters and against the American people. And I really question the legitimacy of the court following the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett.
The other problem that I see, Lori, is, with Brett Kavanaugh, we know that we only saw 2% of the paperwork that he was involved with when he was working in the Bush administration. And he was one of the lawyers who participated in the team that said torture is okay. It was Brett Kavanaugh, apparently. But we never saw the documents. We never got to see those. And I don't think that most of the senators even knew when Amy Coney Barrett was being questioned that her dad had spent a couple of decades as a lawyer for Shell Oil and the American Petroleum Institute and was, part of this, right in the middle of this cabal of climate change denial and fossil fuel denial. Do you have any idea what percentage of the paperwork? I know she's refusing to deliver anything from when she worked on the Bush v. Gore lawsuit in 2000. But have we seen any real part of her history outside of her public pronouncements? I
think that's the exact right question to be asking, Tom. There is no doubt that this whole entire process has been a sham. The fact that they have rammed it through in such a short amount of time where we're in the middle of elections. The American people should be deciding, according to their own precedent, the American people should be deciding who the next Supreme Court judge is or justice is. And they are just obfuscating her record. They are obfuscating the facts from the American people. And again, I really think that calls into question the legitimacy of the court at this point.
Yeah. It's going to be a very, very interesting year. I was disappointed to hear Joe Biden say that he was going to wait 6 months for his commission to come back with recommendations on how to deal with our court system, because I think that they need to hit the ground running with this on day one. And if they were Republicans, they would be planning it right now, and they would hit the ground running. And I don't get it, why the Democrats need to sit around and wait for a commission to do this for 6 months. But beyond that, we've got a serious problem here.
I'm sure you saw
Lori,
McConnell's comments today, where he was sort of, flaunting the fact that a lot of the rollbacks that they've done might get turned over, but that we would never be able to do anything about that. We would never be able to do anything about the courts. So I think McConnell is really betting on the fact that Democrats don't push. But the reality is the courts are our last blockade against the right's push to roll back clean water protections, roll back clean air protections. So we are in a very, very precarious place right now, and it's really up to, hopefully a Democratic Senate to step in and make it right.
I'm with you. Lori Lodes, Executive Director of ClimatePower2020.org. Lori, thanks so much for dropping by today and sharing this information with us.
Of course.
Yeah, great talking with
you. Thank you.
We will be, and just to move along here, let's pick up some phone calls. In fact, I started to say we'll be right back because I'm so used to doing that after. But anyway, Maggie in Cold Springs, Minnesota. Hey, Maggie, what's on your mind today?
All right. I was especially calling about the Minneapolis Star-Tribune article that you were reading about after the George Floyd protests. And this is something that certainly after the white supremacists, anarchists burned down the Minneapolis 3rd Police Precinct, and I watched it on TV with my own eyes, and I was thinking, isn't that surprising? It's a bunch of young white men throwing these Molotov cocktails and such. And by Saturday, the 30th of May, Governor Walz and the FBI and law enforcement had figured out that that's what was going on. At first, they were, decoyed, and it really, for weeks after that, the people of Minneapolis and St. Paul were living in terror because these white supremacists would go and hide like water bottles of gasoline in different neighborhoods around the cities, and then wait till night to slip in and set things on fire. And it's been long for a long time, since early June. Attorney General William Barr and Donald Trump keep trying to push this Antifa fake story, basically, because as FBI Director Christopher Wray said at the same press conference that AG Barr said about Antifa, Christopher Wray said this is just mainly a group or a thought of a social group of people, or not even a group. It's not.
Yeah, it's short for anti-fascist. It's not.
Exactly.
It's not a club or a group that actually has a membership roster. Although Trump and Barr, they're just lying through their teeth about this stuff. And Maggie, thank you for your perspective from Minnesota. Go ahead.
Yes, and I wanted to say that I was watching every night long, and I saw a lot of these white supremacists on the TV, even when the reporters weren't aware that that's exactly, and they were looked just like the ones who were burning down the precinct.
I think people in Minnesota were figuring it out. Maggie, thank you. Thank you for the call, and thanks for sharing your story with us. Steve in Bridgeport, Vermont. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I'm a postal carrier, and I'm going to tell you today I got a little good news for you.
Okay.
We had 2 service talks today. One, that when we get a ballot, we are to separate it so they could go right to town hall the next day, without going to a processing plant. And then on Thursday, starting on Thursday, every day until Election Day, we are to go to every mailbox and check for outgoing mail, irregardless if there's a flag up indicating if there's outgoing mail. And then we got an email this morning that any ballots we get, they want to turn around the same day.
That is great, Steve. It sounds like Louis DeJoy finally figured out that he might be able to go to jail for all this.
Well, this is actually from our district, so this may be our district head taking charge.
Because, I see.
Vermont,
in any case,
Vermont and civics and the Northeast and civics and voting, we are very strong on it.
Oh yeah. I mean, and that goes back to the long history in New England, in the New England area of town hall meetings. I mean, the town meetings. Louise and I lived in Vermont for 10 years. I remember those. Steve, thank you for the call. Good news. We'll be back 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Back with more of your calls in just a minute.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Stick around. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Pam in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Hey, Pam, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Hi. I was just reading your book this weekend, or kind of skimming it, on the Supreme Court, and my concern about what should be happening later today. And, I had a couple of thoughts about how to fix the court. you laid out some, like you talk about court stripping, and the problem with that is that it can be done and then undone when the balance of power shifts. But also adding seats could work that way too, so it just goes back and forth. But clearly what's going on today is just, I don't feel like the court represents me at all, just not even close. And I don't really feel comfortable with them being able to make decisions, with that kind of lineup, with that seriously minority rule. So it's very concerning. Right. And I'm also thinking about all the federal judges. The Supreme Court judges you can't make the case they're just incompetent, but a lot of those federal judges were just unqualified. Passing legislation that says judges have to perform at a certain level could help with that. But it just needs to be restructured. We need to do the term limits, and I think we need to pass some legislation that helps us. One thing I can't seem to get around, because I think the Constitution says the president puts them up for the Senate to advise and consent, but it would be nice to have a neutral body putting these people out as just competent judges and not partisan puppets.
Well, up until the last 20 years, it was always the American Bar Association. The Bush administration started using the Federalist Society recommendations, and Trump made it nothing but. It was all Federalist Society all the time. But your points are all well taken, Pam. The one thing that I would add that's not in my book, and I wish I had thought about it or somebody had told me about it while I was writing the book, and I read a lot of stuff when I was doing the research for that book about how to fix the Supreme Court. And nowhere did I come across this suggestion. But somebody called in with us a couple days ago, and it was brilliant. He said, why don't we pass a law, since Congress has the power to regulate the court, and it's explicit right there in Article 3, Section 2, 3.2, that Congress can pass a law saying that if the court is going to exercise judicial review, they must have a supermajority. They must have, 7 out of 9 votes, for example, or a percentage, that represents that in the event that we're going to expand the size of the court. And that seemed like that made a lot of sense, because there's an enormous in fact, the last 80, this is Sheldon Whitehouse was talking about this, there were 80 5-4 decisions where all 5 votes were Republican nominees, all 4 no votes were Democratic nominees. And every single one of those 80 principally benefited billionaires and big corporations, and principally screwed average working people or the environment. And and these were all decisions that were decided on a constitutional basis. They were using judicial review in every single one of these cases. So why not require a supermajority? I mean, that seems like a good idea too. So anyhow, Pam,
okay. Real quick, just we did the 2/3 before, and then the Republicans wouldn't let us get anyone through. So that's a problem.
Well, that was in the Senate. I'm talking about the Supreme Court itself has to have a supermajority. So you can't have a 5-4 decision anymore and have it be a decision. It would have to be 7-9. Pam, I got to run, but thank you. We'll be right back. You can help America return to democracy by telling friends and family how to listen to this and other great progressive programs. Tag you're it. So back in 2018, Baird, the German pharmaceutical company, bought Monsanto, the American chemical and pesticide company, and, God only knows what else, seeds and whatnot. Anyhow, Baird bought them for $63 billion. Baird just very recently set aside $10 billion to cover the cost of consumers, people in their homes who bought Roundup and got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, cancer, from Roundup, this product that Monsanto makes that Baird now is responsible for. $10 billion. The kicker is that the home use of Roundup only represents about 10% of Monsanto's sales of this product, glyphosate. It's amazing. There's a whole video about this for the people who support our program over at thomhartmann.com. You can check it out over there. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Stephanie in Orange Beach, Alabama. It says here you disagree with me, Stephanie, so you go right to the front of the line. What's up?
Well, I want to know that if the Democrats or progressives feel like it's okay to pack the court, then if after November 3rd, President Trump wins re-election and the Republicans hold the Senate, then do you also feel like it's okay for the Republicans to go ahead and preemptively pack the court with conservative judges, since the Democrats have already, that's their plan if they win? So if the Republicans win, should they go ahead and preemptively do that just to make it harder for the Democrats down the road? Do you think that's right?
Well, I think they already have, Stephanie. Mitch McConnell held Merrick Garland's nomination for 344 days. And,
no, I understand
and then gave that seat to Neil Gorsuch. And then Anthony Kennedy's son, when his... Wait, let me just finish what I'm saying, Stephanie. I'll give you all the time you want. And then Anthony Kennedy's son got tied up with Donald Trump in this huge scandal. Anthony Kennedy's son was the head of commercial banking for Deutsche Bank. And he was the guy who signed off on $1 billion in loans to Donald Trump, $300 million of which Donald Trump defaulted on. His son apparently had a conversation with Anthony Kennedy, who, in great health, resigned from the Supreme Court to make space for Brett Kavanaugh. And then now we've got Amy Coney Barrett. And frankly, I'm not a big fan of we should wait until the election. I think that what the Republicans are doing right now with Barrett is they're well within their rights to do it. I think that the Democrats, instead of saying you shouldn't do this close to an election, which is using Mitch McConnell's lie from 4 years ago, they should be saying, right, you stole Garland's seat, we're going to steal Barrett's seat by blocking you. But the fact of the matter is they don't have the power to do that. But Stephanie, they've preempted, and not only that, the last 2 years of the Obama administration, over 100 federal judgeships came open, and Mitch McConnell refused to fill a single one. And, Donald Trump was on TV the other day marveling, I had 246 federal judges in my first 3 years. Nobody's ever had that many. Well, nobody's ever had that many because in the history of the entire 240-year history of the United States Senate, no Senate Majority Leader has ever blocked a sitting president from having any of his judicial appointees considered for two full years, which is what McConnell did to Obama. So I think it's pretty egregious, Stephanie.
Well, I think you have a fair point, but I will say that everything Mitch McConnell did was within the bounds of the law. He didn't do anything that he didn't have the authority to do. And that is the way our government is set up. It's the way it works. He used the powers that were given to him by the people who elected him and by the Constitution. And so you can say he didn't fight fair, but, he used the tools that were given to him. Now, maybe
I agree. And all's fair in love and politics. And
I thought he...
Forgive my interrupting you, Stephanie, after I asked you not to interrupt me, but I think we just have a minute and a half left here before the end of the hour. So I just want to make a quick point, which is then if the Democrats take the Senate and the White House, they will be within the law and within their right to expand the number of justices on the Supreme Court, right? You'll grant that point, I'm assuming.
Certainly, just like the Republicans would be if they hold the House and if they hold the Senate and the presidency. They could expand it to 15 and put all. You know what I mean? Does that sound like a good idea? I mean,
well, actually, I think it is a good idea whether it's done by Republicans or Democrats. Because the court used to be the final court of appeals. They get about 10,000 referrals a year. And last year, I think they heard 186 cases. And they decided most of those on constitutional grounds. And so as a result, the final court of appeals is not available to most Americans any longer. So if they were to expand it to 15 or even 13 and do it like they do with the appeals courts, where you can have a small panel of 3 people to hear the case, or you can have a larger panel or whatever, and you can process a lot more cases, I think that'd be a good thing. And I think we need to expand our federal courts as well, right across the board, because they're stuck where they were in 1950 when there were literally half as many people in the United States as there are now. Maybe slightly more than half, but our population has pretty much doubled in my lifetime.
Yes.
And certainly the planet's population has, but I'm pretty sure the United States has. So I think that we should grow with the times. So,
I agree,
Stephanie, are we in agreement here?
I don't know if if one side packs the court, the next time around, the other side will do it again, and so on and so forth.
Sure.
Then we'll end up with 1,000 Supreme Court justices. And I don't think that's a good idea.
Well, yes and no, because if like when Andrew Johnson became president, when Lincoln was assassinated, Congress met. At that point in time, Lincoln had taken the court from 9 up until 10. Because, he added a 10th justice because he wanted an anti-slavery vote. And they reduced it down to 7, so Andrew Johnson couldn't put anybody on. But that didn't kick anybody off. So, it's a little tougher to do it kind of on the back end like that. But anyhow, Stephanie, thank you for the call, and thanks for a civil conversation. I appreciate it. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. Don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. No matter who you're voting for, get out there and vote. Well, especially if you're a Democrat. No, seriously. I am all in favor of every informed voter in America, every citizen in America, informed or not, being able to vote every election without impediment. So anyhow, get out there, get active, tag you're it. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of shopping for insurance. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Help. More info at teethhealth.com, code Tom. HelloFresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code Tom. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Tom. And CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom.